Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio channel. Tonight we step into the deep winter of 1840, where the daylight fades early, the trees stand black against the snow, and one small cabin waits in a lonely clearing, as if it has been holding its breath for you. What does it feel like to shut a wooden door against a frozen wilderness and know that, for the night, no other human voice will reach you? What little sounds begin to matter when the world outside turns white, still and watchful? You are about to find out. The fire is not yet strong, the cold has already found your boots, and somewhere beyond the pines the dark is gathering itself with patient intent. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and as you listen tonight, let me know your location and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and you come up the last narrow track with your shoulders aching beneath the weight of a flour sack, a bundle of iron traps, and a wool blanket that smells faintly of smoke and horse. The cabin appears slowly through the trees. Not grandly, not heroically, but with the stubborn plainness of a thing built because it had to be. It sits in a shallow clearing ringed by pine and bare hickory, its roof pitched steep enough to shed snow, its walls made from rough logs notched at the corners by patient hands. Frost grips the north side in a thin white film, and the small window is clouded at the edges where old grease and ash have smeared into the glass. You stop for a moment to breathe, and the air bites your nose so sharply that your eyes water. Evening on the frontier does not arrive gently. It gathers itself in layers. First, the gold light drains from the upper branches. Then the blue shadows lengthen across the snow crust. Then the cold settles harder against your cheeks and wrists, as if the whole clearing is tipped into shade forever. You hear the creak of leather harness from the mule behind you, the dull clink of a cooking pot hanging against your pack, and the whisper of wind moving through pine needles high above. The place smells of resin, damp bark, and old wood smoke buried under clean frost. You set the flour sack down on the porch step, if that humble plank deserves the dignity of the word porch, and flex your stiff fingers. The latch lifts with a dry wooden knock. The door sticks at first. It always does when the weather turns. You lean your shoulder into it, and the cabin opens with low complaint, releasing a breath of cold indoor air touched with soot, mouse droppings, and the ghost of last autumn's fire. Inside, the dimness feels thick enough to touch. The room is one square chamber with a loft above, reached by pegs driven into the wall. A table stands beside the window, its surface scarred by knife cuts and black rings from iron mugs. Two stools wait beside it like old men too tired to gossip. The bed is a narrow frame filled with a cornhusk tick, topped by folded hides that look warm in theory and less convincing in practice. In the hearth lies a drift of grey ash. Beside it, a stack of split oak remains where you left it weeks ago, though the smaller kindling has clearly been nibbled by some creature with very little respect for property rights. You close the door quickly. That matters. In weather like this, every unnecessary draught feels like a personal insult. The latch drops into place. For a moment the silence is complete. Then you hear the cabin itself speaking in its tiny frontier dialect. A wall log ticks as trapped frost loosens. The chimney throat gives a soft, hollow murmur. Something rustles in the corner, probably a mouse, possibly an ambitious mouse with land claims. You kneel at the hearth and brush back the ash with your gloved hand. Under the grey powder, a few black coals crumble at once. Dead. No miracle waiting there. You would not have trusted one anyway. Frontier life is full of practical disappointments. Romantic paintings seldom mention them. Nobody ever commissions a portrait titled "Person Searching Sadly for a Viable Ember," so you begin the old work. Tinder first, dry shavings from the pouch, a curl of birch bark, splinters of pine, then the flint and steel from your coat pocket, cold enough to sting your fingertips. The first spark dies, the second glows and vanishes, the third catches the bark in a tiny orange eye. You bend close and blow carefully until the flame opens and stretches. The smell rises at once, sweet and sharp, like sap warming in sunlight. Soon the kindling begins its cheerful crackle, a sound so encouraging that it almost feels companionable. You feed the little flame with thicker sticks, then two small logs. Smoke puffs into the room before finding the chimney draught, and you wave it away, coughing into your sleeve, your eyes smart. The fire recovers its dignity. It settles into a steady burn, orange at the base, blue at the edges, and you feel the first weak touch of warmth against your face. It is not much. Still, it is a beginning. Settlers often built cabins like this from green timber, which shrank as it dried and opened gaps between the logs. Chinking those gaps with clay, moss, and bits of wood could mean the difference between tolerable discomfort and a night spent wondering whether your eyelashes might freeze together. Some accounts claim people slept with so much frost on the inside walls that the morning looked like a pale indoor snowfall. Historians still argue over how common those dramatic descriptions really were, since memoirs grew more colourful with retelling, but nobody disputes the general truth. A careless cabin was a hungry, heat-swallowing thing. You unroll your bedding near the hearth to air it. The hides are stiff at the edges, glossy where years of use have polished them with body oil and smoke. Your blanket is coarse under your fingers, but solid, and tonight that counts more than softness. You hang your coat from a peg to dry the little trace of melted snow at the hem. Then you carry in the rest of your goods, one trip at a time. Flour, salt pork, a sack of beans, a tin of coffee carefully wrapped, lead shot, powder horn, an axe with a nicked bit, a kettle, 2 candles, a Bible with a cracked spine, a packet of letters tied in cloth, the ordinary kingdom of one person alone. Outside, the mule stamps and snorts steam into the darkening air. You lead him around to the lean shelter, rub down his neck, and shake out a measure of feed. His breath smells warm and grassy, a strangely comforting smell in all that iron cold. You check the sky while he eats. The clouds have thickened. They move low and heavy, sealing up the last pale gap in the west. Snow will come before midnight. You can feel it in the stillness. Even the trees seem to know. Back inside, you bar the door and add another log to the fire. Light begins to take shape in the room. Though it reaches only so far, corners remain dark. The loft overhead is a strip of shadow. Your own movements seem both intimate and theatrical, each gesture lit by fire on one side and swallowed by dusk on the other. You set water in the kettle and listen as the metal settles over the flames with a faint singing sound. Hunger arrives the way true hunger always does, not as a dramatic cry but as a deep practical instruction. Eat now. You slice salt pork with your knife, the fat pale and firm, the meat smelling rich and faintly sweet. Soon it sputters in a pan, throwing off a savoury scent that fills the cabin and covers less friendly odours. Beans follow, then a heel of coarse bread warmed near the hearth. The first mouthful tastes of smoke, salt, and relief. You eat slowly, elbows on knees, staring into the flames. No one speaks. No one asks what sort of day you had. No one laughs at the way you nearly dropped the pan in your hurry. Solitude has a blunt honesty. It does not flatter you with importance. It only waits to see whether you have enough sense to keep the fire fed and your socks dry. The wind rises after supper. You hear it first as a distant combing sound in the pines, then as a firmer push against the cabin wall. The roof answers with a faint creak. Loose snow skitters across the yard like handfuls of sand. Somewhere a branch knocks once, then again, against another branch. You sit very still, listening. On the frontier, you learn the moods of noise. Some sounds belong to weather, some belong to wood settling. Some belong to living things with paws, hooves, or less welcome intentions. A cabin at night can sharpen superstition in even the practical-minded. People who spent their days measuring powder, counting beans, and judging weather by cloud shape still carried odd beliefs into the dark. There were tales of charms tucked above door lintels, silver buttons sewn into hems, and bits of rowan or cedar hung to turn bad luck aside. Such customs travelled across oceans and languages, and once they reached lonely places, they rarely became less vivid. A person alone with winter outside can grow surprisingly respectful of old nonsense. You test the shutters and inspect the chinking near the floor. Cold threads creep through here and there, brushing your ankles. You plug one gap with a twist of cloth and another with a wedge of bark. That done, you strip off your wet outer layers and pull on dry wool. The shirt scratches your skin. Your stockings are thick, unevenly darned, and glorious. Warmth, in 1840, is often ugly. It does not care about elegance. The kettle begins to tremble. You make coffee black enough to alarm a gentler sentry and hold the tin cup with both hands. Heat sinks into your palms. The steam smells bitter and grounding. For a while you sit by the window and rub clear a patch in the cloudy glass. The clearing has nearly vanished. Snow starts as a few testing flakes drifting through the dark. Then more follow, pale strokes barely visible except when they cross the line of firelight leaking from the window. You think of the many frontier cabins scattered across North America in this period, some raised by homesteaders, some by hunters, some by families pausing on longer journeys west. Their exact number is impossible to know, and records favour land claims more than ordinary shelter. Yet the image endures because it was real in thousands of variations. One room, one chimney, one door between human warmth and indifferent weather. The details changed by region, timber, custom, and means. But the feeling must have been much the same. Close the latch, feed the flame, listen to the night. The night, naturally, has opinions of its own. You hear the first howl when the fire has burned down to a broad red bed, and the room feels almost comfortable. It rises so faintly at first that you think it is wind slipping along the chimney. Then it comes again, longer this time, with a wavering note at the end that lifts the hair at the back of your neck. A wolf, far off, but not unimaginably far. Then another answers from a different quarter, lower and rougher. You do not leap up in panic. Frontier people knew wolves well enough not to waste energy on theatrical terror. Wolves rarely attacked a cabin full of noise, smoke, and hard wood. Still, hearing them at night was another matter. Sound travels strangely over snow. Distance bends. A creature can seem near when it is not, or hidden when it is close enough to smell your stockyard. You set down the cup and listen until the silence closes again. Your heart beats a little faster, that's normal. You're alone, not carved from oak. The smell of the fire deepens as the logs settle inward. Oak now, dense, dependable, almost sweet beneath the soot. You add another stick and watch sparks climb the chimney like brief orange insects. The walls hold the light better than before. Even so, the upper corners remain uncertain. Shadow has a way of making every hanging tool look mildly accusatory. You decide to prepare carefully for sleep while you still feel sensible. Rifle cleaned and loaded, within arm's reach of the bed. Powder kept dry, knife on the table, boots placed where you can find them in the dark, water bucket filled, extra wood stacked close enough to grasp without stumbling. These tiny arrangements calm the mind because they turn fear into tasks, and tasks are a language the frontier understands. Before bed, you take one candle and climb the wall pegs to the loft. The flame shakes in the draught, throwing long bars of light along the rafters. Here the air is warmer but closer, smelling of old hay, dust, and timber sap. A few dried herbs still hang from a nail, brittle and colourless now. Something has nested in one corner and wisely departed. You crouch and feel the roof boards from beneath, cold as stone. Snow begins ticking softly against them. Below the fire marks out a little circle of life. Above, the roof receives the weather. Between those two facts, you exist for the night. When you climb down, you kneel once more at the hearth and spread your hands toward it. The skin on your knuckles is cracked from work. The heat pulls at those tiny splits with a tender sting. Outside, the wolves call again, not in a frenzy, not in a hunt you can map, but in the casual, eerie manner of creatures reminding the dark that it belongs to them as much as to anyone. The sound enters the cabin, filters through the chinks, and settles into your bones. Yet the cabin does hold. That matters too. The logs stand firm, the latch is set, the meal sits warm in your stomach, the mule is sheltered. Snow thickens at the window, softening the yard into white obscurity. You bank the fire with care, drawing larger logs close, laying them so they will catch slowly through the coldest hours. Then you kneel by the bedside and lower yourself under a blanket and hide, feeling the rough fabric scrape your chin. The bed gives a husky sigh. The room is dim now, all amber pulse and shadow. Your toes search out the warmest place and eventually find something close enough. One hand rests near the rifle stock. The other lies open on the blanket, still carrying the faint scent of pine pitch and salt pork. You listen to the wind, to the low shifting of coals, to one last distant howl dissolving into snowfall, and you let the little cabin gather around you like a wooden shell against the immense white dark. Morning does not arrive with cheerful brightness. It seeps into the cabin slowly, pale and cold, like watered milk poured across the rough boards. You wake before full light, not because you are rested, but because the air has sharpened enough to find every exposed inch of skin. The fire in the hearth has fallen to a dull red eye beneath grey ash. The room smells of spent smoke, damp wool, and the faint mineral scent of frozen clay. For a moment you lie still under the blanket and hides, gathering the will to leave the small island of warmth you made with your own body during the night. Then duty, that old frontier alarm clock, nudges you up. The floor shocks your bare feet even through your stockings. It is a deep, dry cold, the kind that seems to rise from the earth itself. You pull on your boots and crouch by the hearth. Ash dusts your hands as you scrape gently through the coals. There is enough life left there to matter. Good. You feed it dry curls of shavings and a little nest of pine splinters, then bend low and blow until orange returns. The first flame flickers, wavers, then takes hold with a small, eager crackle. You smile at it despite yourself. Strange, really, how much affection you can feel for controlled combustion. Soon the room begins to change. Not warm, exactly. That would be too generous a word at this hour. Less hostile, perhaps. The shadows thin near the hearth. The iron kettle gives off a faint metallic smell as you set it above the revived fire. Your fingers ache as they thaw, and the pain comes in tiny needles, one after another, as if the morning feels obliged to remind you who is in charge. You rub a clear patch on the window and look outside. Snow has covered the clearing in a smooth, unbroken sheet, except for the small drift piled against the cabin wall and the narrow, dark shapes of tree trunks rising beyond. The lean shelter stands with a rounded white cap on its roof. The mule is there, alive, displeased, and coated along the back with a fine dusting of crystals. He turns his head toward the cabin as though you are personally responsible for winter. An argument could be made. You button your coat, wrap a wool scarf around your neck, and unbar the door. It resists, sealed at the threshold by packed snow. When it opens, the morning air strikes your face so hard that your breath catches. The clearing looks clean and silent in a way that almost feels artificial, as though the world has been remade overnight from salt and glass. Every sound carries. The mule shifts his weight. A branch drops snow with a soft padded thump. Far off, a woodpecker knocks at a trunk with patient determination. You cross to the shelter with a pail of water, and the packed snow squeaks under your boots. That sound belongs only to true cold. The mule noses your sleeve for grain before you have even set down the bucket. His whiskers are stiff with frost. You rub his neck, feeling the warmth beneath the coarse winter hair, and the animal's smell of him rises through the icy air, strong and reassuring. Feed, water, hay, a quick check of the hooves. No drama. Frontier care is usually less about heroism than repetition. By the time you step back inside, your nose is numb and your eyelashes hold a dusting of melted crystals. You shut the door fast and stand near the fire until the sting leaves your cheeks. Coffee goes into the pot, black and bitter. A bit of cornmeal follows into a pan with water and a pinch of salt. The mush thickens slowly while you stir, and the spoon drags against the bottom with a soft scraping sound. Breakfast is humble, but it sends up steam, and that is half the pleasure. You eat from the bowl with both hands around it, feeling the heat climb into your palms. The taste is plain, earthy, comforting in its own severe way. On many frontiers, cornmeal became the reliable backbone of a winter diet because it stored well and asked little of the cook beyond water, patience, and resignation. Travellers wrote about it with varying levels of gratitude, from practical acceptance to culinary despair. Some families flavoured it with molasses or grease when they had either to spare, others simply endured it. A great many historical meals were less about delight than about keeping the machinery of a person running one more day. Once you finish eating, the real labour begins. A cabin never stops asking for something. There is ash to clear, water to haul, wood to split, snow to sweep away from the threshold, and small repairs waiting in corners like petty aristocrats who assume your schedule belongs to them. You carry the ash outside in a battered shovel and dump it beyond the side wall, where the grey mound looks oddly blue in the morning light. A breath of wind sends the finest powder skimming off its surface. The smell lingers, dry and slightly bitter. Then comes water. The creek lies a short walk downslope, partly screened by alder and scrub oak. In summer it chatters over stones. In winter it narrows into a black moving ribbon between shelves of ice. You take the bucket and the hatchet and follow the path, though the path is mostly a memory under snow. The trees stand close here, their trunks dark with cold, their branches carrying white loads that shift and sigh overhead. The forest has a muffled quality today, as though each sound wears wool. At the creek edge, the ice has sealed most of the shallows, leaving only a narrow open strip where current still moves. You chop away the new crust along the bank, and each blow rings out cleanly through the trees. Chips of ice fly against your boots. You kneel, dip the bucket, and watch the dark water swirl up with bits of silver light in it. Your glove gets wet at the cuff. That is annoying. Wet is always annoying. Wet on the frontier is an insult with ambitions. You pause before heading back and study the snow near the waterline. Tracks cross the bank. Rabbit, light and paired. Deer, deeper and pointed. Something smaller. Perhaps fox. The wilderness leaves its handwriting everywhere, and you learn to read because not reading feels foolish. A hunter in this period often knew the shape of local tracks as well as he knew the marks on his own tools. Yet even experienced woodsmen occasionally disagreed. Historians and naturalists still debate some frontier journal descriptions, especially when excited observers transformed ordinary signs into dramatic encounters. Memory is an artist. Snow, at least, is honest while it lasts. Back at the cabin, you set the full bucket inside and turn to the woodpile. Oak and hickory rounds wait under a rough covering of bark and old planks. The axe handle feels smooth where long use has polished it, and cold where the warmth of your hand has not yet reached. You choose a round, set it upright on the chopping block and bring the blade down. The crack echoes sharply. One split piece falls aside, then another. Soon the rhythm takes over. Lift, breathe, strike. The scent of fresh split wood rises clean and sweet, more alive than the dry, dusty smell of the stacked pieces inside. Chips collect around your boots. Your shoulders warm from effort, then burn pleasantly beneath your coat. People love to imagine frontier life as one long parade of dramatic dangers, but much of it was simply maintenance. The cold did not need to chase you through the trees with a theatrical grin. It only needed you to be lazy once. Skip woodcutting in fair weather, and you pay for it after dark. Ignore a loose roof shake, and you discover its opinion during the next storm. Romance has little to say about this. An axe does. By midday, sweat has dampened your shirt between the shoulders, and that means it is time to stop. Never work yourself wet in deep cold if you can avoid it. You carry the split wood inside, stacking it close to the hearth in neat rows. The cabin gradually fills with the smell of bark, coffee grounds, and warming iron. Light from the window brightens enough to show every nick in the table and every uneven stroke of the old whitewash brushed over the inner chimney stones. Dust motes drift through the beams like lazy ash. You decide to improve the walls. During the night, the draughts made themselves known with rude clarity. Near the east side, where the logs have shrunk apart, thin threads of air still slip through and touch your ankles. You fetch the bucket of clayish mud kept from the autumn thaw, a bundle of moss dried near the hearth, and a wooden paddle. It is sticky, awkward work. You press moss deep into the gaps, then smear the mud over it, flattening the surface with cold fingers and the edge of the paddle. The mixture smells earthy and damp, like riverbank soil dragged indoors. This kind of chinking varied from place to place. Some cabins used clay mixed with straw. Others relied on lime mortar if it could be made or bought. In poorer districts, mud and moss did the honourable work because mud and moss were free, and free has always enjoyed a strong position in household decision-making. The results were rarely elegant. Still, elegance is a city habit. A frontier wall only needed to stay put and keep out the wind. As you work, the cabin takes on a more sealed feeling. Not perfect, never perfect, but improved. When you stand back and hold your hand near the repaired gaps, the draft is less sharp. That alone lifts your spirits. You wash the mud from your fingers in cold water and dry them on a rag already too stiff with old soap and ash. Your knuckles are reddened and rough. Your nails hold a permanent acquaintance with dirt. Civilization, at this distance, has trouble keeping up appearances. The afternoon light begins to tilt. Winter light always seems to make a private decision to leave early. You hang a strip of salt pork near the hearth to soften slightly, then cut a slice for the skillet with beans left soaking in the pot. The smell soon fills the room, rich and heavy, edged with wood smoke. Fat hisses. A bubble breaks at the surface of the beans with a small wet pop. Outside, a crow calls once from the trees, sounding unimpressed by your menu. While the food cooks, you set about smaller matters. The harness strap needs stitching where the leather has cracked near the buckle hole. Your awl goes through with stubborn resistance, and the thread, waxed with tallow, pulls tight under your fingers. You mend a mitten too, darning the thin spot at the thumb with yarn that does not match because vanity rarely survives the first hard winter. On the table beside you lies a candle, your Bible, and the little packet of letters. You touch the letters but do not open them yet. Some company is better saved for evening. The cabin grows warmer than it was in the morning, enough that you can loosen your scarf. Heat settles closest to the hearth and climbs into the room in layers. Your boots dry by the fire, releasing the smell of leather, wet wool, and a trace of stable. The floor remains cold near the door. The window stays rimmed at the edges. Still. The place has begun to feel less like a shelter, borrowed from necessity, and more like an inhabited room. That is no small transformation. A house is built from logs. A refuge is built from repeated acts. Toward late afternoon, snow slides from the roof with a sudden heavy rush that makes you look up sharply. For one foolish instant it sounds like something large striking the cabin. Then silence returns. You laugh at yourself, softly. Because nerves do peculiar things in remote places. People in isolated settlements often interpreted ordinary noises through a lens of caution, folklore, or fatigue. There were stories of panthers screaming like women, owls mistaken for lost souls, and branches rubbing together until someone swore it was a ghost begging at the wall. Whether all those reports reflected belief, or simply a taste for embellishment, remains an open question. Either way, Lonely Country has always encouraged imagination to dress above its station. Supper is ready before full dark. Beans, pork, and the last of the morning mush-fried crisp at the edges. You eat seated close to the fire, where the light turns the steam gold. The spoon is warm in your hand. The meal is heavy, salty, almost aggressively practical. Good. Cold weather has no interest in delicate appetites. Outside, the sky deepens from grey to iron blue, and the clearing loses its detail one shape at a time. You light one candle only after the daylight fades beyond use. Candles are dear enough to earn respect. The flame stands small and steady, adding a softer glow to the redder pulse of the hearth. Shadows shift across the walls. Your patched chinking dries darker in some places, lighter in others, giving the cabin an untidy but improved expression. The room smells now of hot grease, smoke, damp clay, and the faint sweet breath of the candle wax. Night gathers again, though tonight it feels different. The cabin is tighter. The woodpile is larger. Water stands ready by the hearth. Tools are in order. The mule has feed. The repaired strap lies coiled on the stool. These are modest victories. But modest victories are the proper currency of winter life. You take them where you can. At last you untie the packet of letters and choose one by the candlelight. The paper is thin and softened at the folds. When you open it, the smell of old ink and long-kept linen rises faintly from the page. Outside, the wind has not yet strengthened, but the trees murmur among themselves in low tones, and a sound comes once from the far timberline. Not a howl this time, but the short-clipped bark of a fox moving through the snow. You listen, then return your eyes to the letter, with firelight warming one side of your face and cold pressing patiently at the shutter. You hold the letter close to the candle, careful not to let the flame kiss the paper. The ink has browned with time, and the hand is neat in places, hurried in others, as if the writer could not decide whether to be composed or honest. That seems fair. Most people are one interruption away from honesty. You read slowly, letting each line settle in the quiet cabin. The words speak of ordinary things, which makes them feel almost luxurious. A cousin married in October, a neighbour's cow gone dry too soon, a child who has learned to whistle through 2 missing front teeth, a church roof repaired after a hard rain. No grand revelations, no sweeping drama, just the little domestic facts of a world where lamps are trimmed, bread is baked, and someone always knows who borrowed the good kettle and failed to return it. The letter carries a smell that is not quite there and yet unmistakable. Old paper, linen, perhaps lavender once tucked into the chest where it was kept. Or perhaps that is only your mind dressing memory in perfume. Minds do that. They are vain little tailors. You read the last line twice, fold the sheet along its softened creases, and sit for a long moment with it resting in your palm. Outside, the clearing has disappeared into dark. Only the window tells you where the open space begins, a black square filmed with frost. The candle flame moves when the wind presses at the cabin, and its light throws a slender yellow blade across the table. Beside it, the spoon from supper still gleams with a thin trace of grease. You wipe it clean on a rag and set it aside. Small orderliness feels important at night. Disorder is for daylight, when you can argue with it properly. The fire settles lower, though not badly. Oak coals glow under a crust of white ash, and each time a log shifts, a red seam opens along its side like a hidden vein. Heat spreads from the hearth in soft waves. Your face is warm, your shoulders less so. Your feet, in truth, remain unconvinced by the entire arrangement. You pull the stool a little nearer the flames and stretch your boots toward them, listening to the leather crackle faintly as it dries. Then comes the long quiet. It is a different thing from silence. Silence is simple. Quiet is layered. Quiet contains the hiss of the fire, the light tap of cooling iron, the tiny gnawing scrape from somewhere behind the wall, and the faint powdery patter of snow sliding from a branch outside. Quiet also contains your own breathing, which begins to sound louder than necessary once you notice it. You try not to notice it. That only makes it worse. A hard frontier night had a way of enlarging whatever entered it. A small creak became a presence. A brush of wind along the chinking became a hand searching the seams. Even seasoned settlers, who could shoot straight and judge a horse at a glance, sometimes confess to unease after dark. Their diaries are usually practical, but now and then a line slips through. Strange noises, restless sleep, a feeling of being watched from the timber. Historians are not always sure how much weight to place on such remarks, since fatigue, isolation, and poor lighting can turn perfectly ordinary events into theatre. Still, the feeling itself was real enough. Night does not need proof. You rise and check the latch again, not because it looked unreliable a moment ago, but because hands like tasks when the mind begins wandering. The bar is firm. The shutters sit snug against the window frame. Your rifle rests where you placed it, clean and ready. You add a measured log to the fire, then another smaller piece laid crosswise so it will catch steadily. Sparks run up the chimney with a dry rushing sound. For a few moments the room brightens and every familiar object steps forward. The table, the bed frame, the peg ladder, the hanging coat, the Bible, the kettle. Nothing mysterious after all, just your things, keeping their quiet company. You almost smile at yourself for the inspection. Almost. The wolves start later than you expect. The first howl comes from far enough away to be more beautiful than alarming. It rises in a long silver thread through the cold, quavers at the peak, and trails off into the dark timber. Then another answers, not from the same place. Then a third, shorter and harsher. You sit very still, every sense pulling toward the door and the window as if one of them might explain matters. Sound behaves like a trickster in winter. Snow catches some notes and throws others. Distance folds strangely through the trees. A call that seems to lean against your wall may belong to a ridge half a mile away. Even so, wolves have a gift for making the world feel larger while also making your cabin feel smaller. You listen to the pattern. There is one. You tell yourself there is one. A call from the north edge of the clearing, perhaps near the creek. An answer deeper in the timber. A pause. Then two voices together, higher and more eager. Not a circle closing in. You decide. More likely a pack communicating as it moves along a trail or follows deer. That is the sensible reading. Sensible readings. However, do not stop the skin along your forearms from tightening. You rise and go to the window. A foolish move, perhaps, but a human one. The frost at the pane blurs everything into cloudy darkness. You scrape a narrow, clear place with your thumbnail and peer out. For several breaths you see nothing except a few pale flakes moving through the dark. Then the angle changes. Near the outer edge of the clearing, between two pines, something shifts. Not a shape exactly. A movement, a greyness passing through grey. You hold your breath. It stops. You stop. Then it is gone. Or perhaps it was only a branch carrying snow. This is how nerves begin their work. They take one uncertainty and ask it to dress for supper. You step back from the window and set the candle farther from the glass. No point making yourself a bright little display against the dark. The old practical instincts return. Fire maintained, door barred, rifle near, animals sheltered. That is the list. The list is finite. The wilderness is not. Better to tend the list. Your thoughts drift, as thoughts do when sleep waits but does not yet arrive. You remember stories passed between men at trading posts and woodlots. Stories told with that frontier mixture of truth, exaggeration, and cheerful gloom. A wolf on a frozen river running beside a sled for half a mile. A trapper waking to find tracks around his lean-to by morning. A pair of glowing eyes seen from an upper loft, level with the window, which grew much less impressive once someone remembered the hill outside sloped sharply upward. These stories were not always false. They were simply dressed for company. People have always liked fear better when it can be served warm. In some regions, wolves in the early 19th century still ranged close enough to settlements that local governments offered bounties for their scalps. Notices survive in county records, and the payments could be small but meaningful. Yet the actual danger to people was often lower than rumour suggested. Livestock suffered more readily than cabin dwellers, and panic inflated many encounters. Scholars continue to debate how much anti-wolf sentiment in frontier accounts reflected real threat, inherited European folklore, or competition over game animals. The answer, inconveniently, appears to be all three. The howling comes again, and this time it sounds nearer. Not close enough to scrape claws at the door. Nothing so lurid, but near enough that you can distinguish more than one voice. One is deep and steady. Another lifts sharply at the end of each call. A younger animal, perhaps, or your imagination assigning family roles to sound. Humans cannot resist casting a play. The mule shifts in the shelter outside. You hear the faint thud of a hoof. That pricks your attention at once. Wolves may not be eager to challenge a lit cabin, but a tethered animal is another matter if hunger presses hard enough. You stand, hesitate, then move to the door and place your hand against the wood. Cold radiates through it. You do not open it. Prudence and bravery are cousins who seldom enjoy sharing a room. Instead, you lean close and listen. The wind has fallen. Good. That helps. You hear the brittle whisper of snow crystals moving along the ground. Then a low, soft snort from the mule. No scramble, no panic. If he were terrified, you would know it. Animals are honest in their complaints. You lift the rifle and check the priming by firelight. The metal feels heavy and chill, the walnut stock smooth where hands have worn it. You rest it across your knees and sit again. There is comfort in weight. The candle burns lower. Wax gathers and spills along the side in pale folds. Your shadow on the wall looks broader than it should. A frontier courtesy offered by every bad light source in history. Sleepiness comes in waves, but the night keeps interrupting it. A settling crack from the roof, a hiss from the hearth, another howl, then several sharp yips that break off suddenly. You picture the forest outside without meaning to, pines standing black against snow, the creek dark under its crusted banks, tracks crossing and recrossing where creatures go about their old necessary business. Winter does not care whether you are listening to it. Winter continues. You decide on tea this time instead of more coffee. Sensible. You heat water in a smaller pot and steep a few dried mint leaves from the bundle hanging near the loft. Their smell rises bright and cool above the smoke. The cup warms your hands without setting your heart to galloping. You sip slowly. The taste is thin but pleasant, green and clean, a reminder that summer once existed and may, or by some outrageous miracle, do so again. As you drink, your gaze falls on the Bible at the edge of the table. Many frontier cabins held one even when they held few other books. Sometimes it was read nightly. Sometimes it served mainly as a family record, its blank pages noting births, deaths, marriages, and the sort of practical milestones that matter when official ledgers lie many miles away. You open it, not for doctrine tonight, but for company. The pages whisper under your fingers. The paper feels dry and delicate. You read a few familiar lines and let their cadence settle the room, whether or not you are in a pious mood. Language can steady a person even when certainty refuses to attend. At some point the wolves move on, or grow quiet enough to vanish into the larger dark. Their absence is almost harder to measure than their noise. You wait, listening for another call, but none comes. Now the cabin has resumed its closer sounds. Coals sigh. A knot in the log beside the hearth snaps with a sound like a small knuckle. Meltwater from the kettle lid ticks onto the iron rim. Your own eyelids grow heavy, and the muscles at the back of your neck slacken one by one. Still, one part of you resists giving in. Night in a remote cabin can make sleep feel like negligence. Close your eyes, and the woods get ideas. Ridiculous. Yes, yet not entirely ridiculous. A person alone becomes watchman by default. There is no one else to hear the mule if he pulls his line. No one else to notice if sparks catch where they should not. No one else to rise if the door strains under a drift and the room begins to lose heat. Responsibility is a poor lullaby. You stand once more and make the final arrangements. The fire is banked carefully, logs angled to burn slow and steady. The candle is pinched out between damp fingertips, leaving a curl of smoke that smells faintly sweet. Darkness gathers quickly after that, but not complete darkness. The hearth remains, breathing red and orange into the room, enough to shape the bed, the table, the lower pegs of the loft ladder. You shrug off your coat, fold it within reach, and climb into the narrow bed. The blankets feel cold at first, then merely cool, then gradually less offensive. You tuck them close around your shoulders and pull one edge near your face, breathing in wool, wood smoke, and the faint animal smell of the hide beneath. The rifle lies beside the bed where your hand can find it. Through the wall comes the smallest whisper of wind, no more than a thread. Somewhere far off, perhaps truly far off this time, an owl gives a single hollow call. Your body begins at last to surrender its stiffness. Calves loosen, fingers unclench, jaw softens. The mattress rustles quietly when you shift. Above you, the rafters hold their dark silence. Beyond them, stars may have cleared over the snowfields, though you cannot see them from here. The world outside remains vast, frozen, and full of unseen motion. Inside, the cabin keeps its modest promise. Heat enough, shelter enough, rest, if you are willing to trust it. Your eyes close. The fire pulses gently through your lids. The last thing you hear before sleep finally takes you is not the wolves, nor the wind, but the deep settled breathing of the cabin itself, as if the rough logs and chinked seams have accepted you for the night and decided in their plain wooden way to stand watch. You wake to the smell of cold iron and wood smoke, with a thin band of daylight resting across the foot of the bed. For a few moments you lie still, listening to the room. The fire has nearly spent itself again. A faint wind brushes the outer wall in long, slow passes. Somewhere in the loft, a board gives a dry little tick as the morning cold tightens it. The wolves are gone, or at least silent enough to keep their opinions private. That alone feels like a courtesy. Your breath ghosts in the air when you sit up. So the first order of business is obvious. You pull on your boots, crouch at the hearth, and stir the ash with practiced care. A red glow waits beneath the grey, stubborn and useful. You feed it shaved kindling, then pine splinters, then one split stick laid crosswise. The flame catches with a lively crackle and climbs at once, almost as though it resents being doubted. The new heat touches your hands. It does not reach much farther. Not yet. A frontier fire, like a frontier friendship, often needs steady attention before it grows dependable. You set water to warm and rub the sleep from your face with both palms. The cabin smells layered this morning. Cold ash, dry bark, a faint leftover trace of mint from last night's tea. The greasy, savoury memory of beans and pork still clings to the pan, which you clean with a scrap of cloth and a little hot water. It is not a glamorous kitchen. Then again, glamour has always performed poorly around soot. At the window, the frost has grown thick in fern-like patterns across the glass. You clear a patch with the heel of your hand and peer outside. The sky is brighter than yesterday, almost white above the trees. Sunlight reaches the upper branches and turns the snow there to silver. Down in the clearing, the light is bluer and harder. Every shadow looks cut from slate. The mule stands with his back to the wind, tail still, ears forward, as if personally evaluating the weather and finding it inferior. You decide on a larger breakfast. Good sense. Cold burns through a person from both sides. You slice more salt pork, fry it until the edges curl, and crack 2 precious eggs into the pan, saved carefully against breakage in a nest of cloth. The smell changes the room at once. Rich fat hisses. The eggs set in white halos around their yolks. You toast a rough piece of bread near the flames and eat standing close to the hearth, one shoulder warmed, the other reminding you where you are. The food tastes deeply satisfying in a way that city comfort never quite manages. Hunger sharpens gratitude. Winter sharpens it further. When the meal is done, you pull on your coat and step outside with the axe, a coil of rope, and the long-handled shovel. The cold hits clean and immediate. Snow underfoot gives that dry squeaking complaint again. The air smells bright and empty, with a resin note from the pines and a faint animal tang drifting from the shelter. Sunlight now lies fully across the clearing, but it offers more beauty than mercy. You clear the snow piled against the threshold first. That matters more than it looks. Let drifts build too high around a cabin and you begin losing the edges of your own usefulness. The shovel bites into the loose top layer with a soft hiss, then scrapes against the packed crust beneath. You throw each load aside in a low arc, and powder catches the light like ground glass. Soon your shoulders begin to warm. Soon after that, they begin to protest. You keep going. Most frontier chores reach their nobility only after the point where you would very much prefer to stop. Once the doorway is clear, you turn to the path between the cabin and the mule shelter, then on toward the woodpile. A narrow track is enough. You're not building a boulevard. Still, moving through deep snow all day wastes energy, and energy is a coin winter spends on your behalf only when forced. You stamp the path firm with your boots after shoveling, leaving dark compressed prints in the white. The simple act of making a way from one necessary place to another improves the whole little world. Then you check the roofline. A skin of fresh snow clings there, and a thicker ridge has gathered on the lee side. Too much weight is unwise, especially on rough frontier timbers. You take the long pole kept near the wall and, standing well clear, push upward against the eaves. Snow slides in a soft, heavy rush, breaking apart as it falls. Some lands across your hat brim and collar. Excellent. Nothing like a small avalanche down the neck to focus the moral character. You shake yourself off, muttering to no one, which is one of the many privileges of isolation. Cabins built in newly settled regions often look sturdier in sketches than they felt in bad weather. Roofs might be covered with split shakes, bark, or whatever material the builder could manage before winter outran him. Skilled hands made a great difference, but necessity often hired lesser talent. Some accounts praise cabins that stayed snug through years of storms. Others mention leaks, sagging rafters, or snow sifting down through imperfect joins. Historians still dispute how representative the most dramatic complaints were, because surviving descriptions tend to come from either the unusually proud or the unusually miserable, with not much space left for the merely adequate. Your own roof, for now, seems willing to cooperate. Next comes the woodlot beyond the near trees. Not a grand forest operation, just a practical stretch where deadfall and felled rounds wait to be dragged, split and stacked. You carry the rope and axe there, following the track between trunks where sunlight stripes the snow in narrow bars. The woods feel different by day, less haunted, more observant. Chickadees flick through the branches with quick, bright calls. A squirrel scolds you from high on a limb as though you have trespassed on a complicated legal arrangement. Sap gleams at one broken stump, amber and frozen. You choose a fallen limb first, seasoned dry and half buried under snow. The bark comes away in plates beneath your glove. When you strike, the axe sinks with a crisp bite. Chips scatter. The rhythm returns, steadier than thought. Lift, set, strike. The sound carries through the timber, a blunt, useful echo. Now and then you pause to draw a breath and straighten your back, feeling the cold air move through your lungs like water through a pump. Sweat gathers under your cap. That is your warning. Work hard, but not foolishly. You loosen your scarf and continue more carefully. You cut lengths suitable for the hearth, tie them in a bundle and drag them back to the clearing. The rope strains. The wood scrapes behind you with a gritty rustle over the packed snow. By the time you reach the cabin, your gloves are damp at the palms and your legs feel satisfyingly used. You stack the new lengths near the chopping block and split half at once, setting the rest aside for later. Fresh wood releases that clean living scent again, sweet and almost spicy, especially where oak heartwood opens bright beneath the blade. Near the edge of the clearing, you notice tracks. Not wolf this time, smaller. Delicate paired marks looping under a low bush, then darting toward the timber. Rabbit. A second trail crosses it, narrow and neat, with the light directness of fox. For a few moments you crouch and study them as if the snow were a page and someone had written 2 brief urgent stories before dawn. Tracking was common knowledge in many frontier districts, though skill varied widely. People liked to claim expertise, naturally. Frontier boasting could heat a room better than green wood. Yet genuine observation mattered. Tracks told you who had passed, when they had passed, whether they were feeding, fleeing, limping, or merely conducting whatever inscrutable business belongs to wild creatures at daybreak. You glance toward the deeper trees and see nothing moving. Even so, the place feels inhabited in a broader way than the cabin alone admits. You're not tucked into emptiness. You're one warm object among many lives, each of them pursuing hunger, shelter, and the next survivable hour. Back inside, you hang your coat near the fire and wring the wet from your gloves before setting them to dry. Steam rises from the wool. Your hand's smartest sensation returns to the fingers. The kettle begins its low, pre-boiling murmur. You pour yourself coffee and sit at the table long enough to rest your elbows and feel your pulse settle. Sunlight through the window now reaches farther across the boards, revealing scratches, grain knots, and one dark stain shaped oddly like a map of some forgotten coastline. The day has moved enough that indoor work takes over from outdoor labour. You fetch the broom made from bound twigs and sweep the floor, drawing together ash, bark, tracked snow, and the tiny domestic debris that appears from nowhere in a lived-in room. It is mildly offensive how much dirt one person can generate in a space this small. You empty the sweepings outside and return to rearrange the shelves, powder high and dry. Beans tucked near the wall, coffee sealed tight, candles wrapped again. A strip of pork shifted farther from the prowling interest of any mouse with social ambitions. Then you turn to the rifle. Maintenance is not thrilling, but neglect is expensive. You sit close to the window for better light, checking the flint, wiping the metal, clearing residue from the pan and lock. The smell of oiled cloth mingles with the room's wood smoke. The ramrod slides with a smooth, familiar motion. Firearms in 1840 were sturdy tools, though hardly immune to weather or incompetence. Damp powder, poor flint, fouled barrels, and human error remained excellent partners in disappointment. That is one reason old journals can sound so calm about danger. A person equipped with an unreliable gun becomes philosophical in self-defense. The repaired leather strap from yesterday gets a second look too. The stitches hold. You rub a little tallow into the dry places and work the buckle loose and back again until the strap bends without cracking. Leather, like people, behaves better when not allowed to dry into resentment. Beside it, you sharpen your knife on a whetstone, the blade moving in slow, even strokes. The rasping sound is soft but steady, oddly soothing, like an insect hidden in the wall. At noon, hunger comes back with authority. You heat the last of the beans, add a little pork fat, and crumble bread into the bowl to thicken it. Simple food again, but the smell fills the cabin with a dense, homely comfort. You eat standing at the open door for a moment, letting sunlight strike your boots while the warmer air from the hearth touches your back. The contrast feels almost luxurious. Out in the clearing, the snow gives off a faint, sparkling glare that makes your eyes narrow. Somewhere beyond the trees, a crow and a blue jay engage in what sounds very much like a personal dispute. The afternoon remains bright but bitter. You use it for washing what can be washed: one shirt, two cloths, stockings, and the rag from the table. Warm water in a basin, soap rough and harsh on the skin. The garments darken as they soak, releasing smells of smoke, sweat, leather, and general perseverance. You scrub them against the ridged board, rinse them twice, then hang them on lines near the hearth and loft ladder. Soon the cabin looks faintly ridiculous, as though it has decided to grow its own limp woolen vines. Laundry in a winter cabin is always a compromise between dampness and decency. Dry things too slowly and the room turns sour. Dry them too close to the fire and they scorch. Some frontier households simply postponed washing until weather allowed better odds. Others carried on through the season with a determination that bordered on punishment. No one wrote many poems about the matter, which is probably for the best. By late afternoon the sun has lowered behind the trees and the blue chill begins creeping back across the clearing. You go out one last time to bring extra wood inside. Enough for the evening and the dark hours after. Your breath trails before you. The mule takes his feed with a serious expression that suggests this arrangement should have begun sooner. You check the shelter, adjust the blanket over his back, and rub the frost from the edge of his halter. The smell of hay, hide, and warm animal breath surrounds you for a moment, deeply earthy, almost sweet. When you return to the cabin, you close the door firmly and feel at once how different the room has become over the course of the day. Not larger, not finer, but worked into shape by use. The floor is swept, the tools are in order, clean things hang drying, wood is stacked high, the rifle rests ready, a pot waits near the hearth, light from the fire catches along the walls and gives the rough logs a soft amber sheen. Outside, the sky drains toward evening. Inside, you stand with one hand resting on the table and the other near the warmth, feeling the calm tiredness that comes only after necessary labour. It is not triumph. Something quieter than that. A sense that for one more day, at least, the cold has been answered properly. The morning begins under a low sky the colour of old pewter. No sunlight slips through the frost on the window this time. The cabin wakes in a softer gloom, with the fire giving most of the light and the cold holding the corners in a blue hush. You rise to the now familiar chorus of practical discomforts: stiff shoulders, dry throat, toes that briefly question every choice that led them here. The floor answers with its usual icy honesty. So you crouch at the hearth, coax the coals awake, and watch the first flames lift and unfold through the kindling like bright paper opening. The kettle goes on at once. While the water warms, You stand at the door and listen before unlatching it. That habit has settled into you without asking permission. Listen first, then move. Outside comes only the faint stir of wind in the upper pines and the muffled shifting of the mule in his shelter. No barking fox, no distant howl, no strange scrape at the wall. Just morning, taking itself seriously. You open the door, and the cold enters with a crisp, clean bite. Snow has fallen again during the night, though not deeply. A new white skin lies over the clearing, smoother than before, as if the whole world has been gently covered to keep it from spoiling. Your path is softened. The woodpile wears rounded shoulders. The bare branches beyond the cabin carry a delicate edge of frost, each twig outlined like silver wire. Then you see the tracks. They begin near the far edge of the clearing where the trees crowd close together. At first there are only 2 or 3 dark impressions in the new snow, half in shadow, easy to dismiss. But then the trail curves into the open and the pattern becomes clear. Large prints, oval and neat, laid down in a measured line. 4 toes, claw marks faintly visible ahead of each pad. Another set crosses behind it, then another, slightly smaller. They do not rush, they do not wander. They pass through the white ground with calm intention. You stand very still in the doorway, one hand resting on the latch. Wolves, not a whole ring around the cabin, nothing so theatrical. Still, several have come near enough in the night to leave their signatures plainly where morning can read them. The tracks skirt the clearing, pass the lean shelter at a respectful distance, circle once near the wood line, and angle away again toward the creek. You feel an odd mingling of sensations all at once. A prickle between the shoulder blades, curiosity, a quick tightening in the stomach, also something close to admiration, though you would not care to admit that aloud to a nervous neighbour. The mule lifts his head sharply and blows through his nose, as if the sight of the tracks offends him retroactively. You step out onto the packed snow, closing the door behind you to keep the cabin's warmth from fleeing in protest. The air smells almost metallic this morning, bright and thin, with a deep resin scent where the pines stand thickest. Your boots crunch over the crust as you move closer to the trail. The prints are fresh enough that their edges remain crisp, with no rounding from sun or wind. A little powder still lies loose inside one of them. You crouch, glove resting on your knee, and study the shape. A large dog would leave something similar, but there are no dogs out here unless someone has appeared from nowhere with very poor timing. The trail runs too smooth, too deliberate. One print lands almost exactly in the last, conserving effort. The stride is steady, confident. You follow the line with your eyes and notice where one animal paused near a low stump. The snow there is disturbed by a brief turn, as if it stood and scented the air toward the cabin. Toward you? Well, charming. Frontier people often knew wolves less as monsters than as winter competitors. They stole chickens, worried sheep, trailed game, and occasionally frightened livestock into useless exhaustion. Folklore enlarged them, certainly. So did long dark evenings and a fondness for exaggerated storytelling. Yet a practical respect lay beneath the embellishment. Hunters watched for tracks because tracks meant information. A pack moving near a settlement might simply be passing through, following deer or scenting refuse, or it might return if easier opportunities presented themselves. The line between nuisance and genuine threat could be annoyingly blurred. You straighten and scan the timber. The trees keep their counsel. Snow lies in deep, quiet folds between trunks. No movement, no grey forms slipping between shadows. Even the birds seem slower this morning, as though the weather has encouraged them to conserve their opinions. You check on the mule first. Sensible priorities. He stamps once as you approach, then stands while you inspect the area around the shelter. The wolf tracks came near, but not very near. They did not bunch or dig or show signs of a rush. That steadies you. Still, you adjust the lead rope, make certain the fastenings are secure, and bring him an extra measure of hay. He eats with abrupt, noisy determination, ears flicking at intervals toward the tree line. His breath rises warm and grassy in the cold. When you return to the tracks, you decide to follow them a little way, not far, Curiosity is admirable only until it becomes the last thing people mention about you. You take the rifle from inside the cabin, settle it in the crook of your arm, and walk the trail along the clearing's edge. The prints pass beneath a fringe of cedar where the smell turns stronger. Green and spicy even in winter. Needles brush your sleeve. Snow sifts lightly from a branch as you disturb it, tapping your shoulder and hat. The trail tells its own calm story. 3 animals at least, perhaps 4, one larger than the rest. They came from the northwest, crossed near the creek, paused where the wind carried the scent of mule and smoke, then moved on. There is no sign of frantic hunger in the pattern, no circling chaos, no pounce marks. They were curious, perhaps, or cautious, or merely practical in the way all creatures are when the weather turns hard. It is unsettling precisely because it is so measured. A reckless beast is easy to dramatize. A patient one is worse. At the edge of the creek bank, the tracks overlap a mess of older prints. Deer, rabbit, fox again. The wolf's trail crosses them all like a final sentence. Near the bank, one print has broken through a crusted layer of snow into powder beneath, leaving a sharp, deep cut. You could place your whole gloved hand in it. You choose not to. There is such a thing as too much intimacy. The creek moves dark beneath its fringes of ice, carrying a slow, glassy sound under the stillness. Water always seems slightly scandalous in deep winter, as if it has refused the season's instructions. You stand there for a while, hearing only the faint current and the quiet creak of trees rubbing somewhere upslope. The wolves are gone. Of course they are gone. They were never waiting politely for your inspection. Even so, the walk back to the cabin feels different. The clearing appears smaller now, not because it has changed, but because you have evidence that other eyes measured it during the night. Your little refuge, with its fire and coffee and hanging laundry and patched mittens, is not hidden from the world beyond the door. It is simply one bright-smelling interruption in a much larger pattern of hunger and movement. Inside, the room receives you with that immediate shift in scent and temperature that now feels almost luxurious. Smoke, bark, warm iron, faint animal hide. You set the rifle within reach, pour the hot water over coffee grounds, and sit down near the hearth. The cup warms your hand. The bitter steam rises into your face. For a while you do nothing except drink and think about paw prints dark in fresh snow. Then practical thought returns, as it generally must. If wolves are passing near, the clearing should look less inviting by night. You can do something about that. Not everything, of course. The frontier is not a stage where one dramatic act solves the plot, but a few measures matter. You finish your coffee, eat a quick breakfast of bread fried in pork grease, and set to work. The first improvement is firewood placement. No scraps near the wall, no bone or grease-soaked rags left outside, nothing that smells too interesting. You gather loose bits from around the chopping block and carry them farther off. The second is light. You split a quantity of resin-rich pine knots and set them aside indoors. Those will burn bright and smoky if needed after dark. The third is noise. From the tool shelf you take an old iron pan and a bent spoon, along with a short length of cord. Crude, yes, but crude tools have saved many elegant souls. You hang the pan just inside the door where it can be seized at once if anything unsettles the mule in the night. Some frontier households relied on dogs for warning, though dogs had varying standards of usefulness. A brave farm dog might challenge anything from a fox to a tax collector. Another would bark at leaves and sleep through burglars. In more isolated places, people improvised alarms with bells, pans, or simple habits of listening. Historians still argue over how widespread these devices truly were, since memoirs tend to describe them only when they worked brilliantly, or failed in an embarrassing fashion. Ordinary success rarely inspires great literature. By mid-morning you go back outside with shovel and axe. The weather remains dull and cold, the kind of day when shadows seem to exist even without sun. You clear more snow from around the mule shelter, so nothing can approach too close under cover of drift. Then you cut several stout branches of cedar and drag them to the clearing. Their scent fills the air, sharp and clean. You lay some near the shelter for extra bedding and prop others as a rough windbreak along the more exposed side. Not beautiful work, but useful. The mule inspects it with deep skepticism. then decides it meets the low moral standards required of shelter improvements. Next, you gather thorny brush from a patch near the creek and heap it loosely behind the lean side of the shelter where the shadows collect earliest. It will not stop determined predators. Few things truly do. But it complicates an easy approach, and complication is often enough to send effort elsewhere. Survival, in many forms, depends on being more troublesome than the next option. As you work, you become aware of how keenly you are watching the tree line. Every sway of branch catches the corner of your eye. Every dark notch between trunks suggests possibility. This, more than the tracks themselves, is the lingering effect. The wolves have already done what they came to do. They have rearranged your attention. Around noon, the sky drops a few fine grains of snow, hardly more than dust. They settle on your coat sleeve and vanish. You carry water from the creek, pausing again where the tracks crossed, but the light fall has begun to soften their edges. By tomorrow morning they will be half erased. It seems almost rude that the world should hide its evidence so quickly after troubling you with it. Dinner, such as it is, becomes a pot of beans with the last scrapings of pork and a handful of dried onions sliced thin. The smell is strong and welcome, filling the cabin with a rich, savoury warmth that pushes back against the grey day outside. You eat with the rifle leaning against the wall beside you, which would look dramatic in a painting and merely sensible in life. Between spoonfuls you listen. Nothing. Just the little murmur of the pot and the occasional pop from the hearth. The afternoon is spent on smaller indoor tasks that keep your hands busy while your mind settles. You patch a tear in the blanket's binding. You shave curls from a block of tallow to make easier candle lighting. You sort lead shot and powder with careful fingers. You even scrape the mud from your boots and oil the leather while they dry. Such domestic attentions might sound delicate until one recalls that dry boots are the difference between tolerable misery and memorable misery. Yet now and then you find yourself at the window, clearing a circle in the frost with your thumb, looking toward the trees. The light goes from pewter to blue. The shapes of the forest thicken. Snow begins again in earnest, small flakes drifting down through the dimness. Beautiful, yes. Also rude in its timing. As dusk gathers, you feed the mule early and bring him extra hay. His coat smells warm and dusty beneath the winter air. He nudges your shoulder, searching for grain. You rub the bridge of his nose and feel the steady life in him. Solid and uncomplicated. Nearby, the snow already takes on that evening glow. Not white now, but faintly violet. The wolf tracks are almost gone. Back in the cabin, you shut the door, set the bar, and light the first of the pine knots in the hearth. It catches with a bright, eager flame, and a burst of resin scent so sharp it nearly tastes sweet. The fire burns higher for a while, sending strong light across the room and up the walls. Shadows jump behind the stools. The iron pan by the door glints like a small waiting moon. Night draws close around the clearing once more, but tonight the darkness feels more informed. You know now that it has passed near your wall on padded feet, and paused to scent your smoke. You know the shape of the prints it left and the calm intelligence in their spacing. That knowledge does not become panic, it becomes vigilance. A quieter thing, a steadier one. You sit by the fire with your supper bowl empty, one hand resting on the rifle stock, and listen as snow whispers against the roof. Somewhere beyond the cedar and pine, hidden in the patient dark, the wilderness continues its own business. Inside, the cabin breathes heat, smoke, and the stubborn human wish to keep a circle of light alive until morning. The snow continues through the night and into morning, though by dawn it falls more gently, as if the sky has tired itself out. You wake to a muffled world. Even inside the cabin, sound feels padded. The fire has shrunk to a bed of faint red light under ash. The room is chilly enough to make the blanket seem briefly noble. For a few quiet breaths you stay where you are, listening to the hush pressing against the walls. No wind this time, no howl, only the tiny dry settling of old logs and the soft breathing of the coals. You rise slowly, with a kind of careful stiffness that belongs to cold rooms and narrow beds. Boots on, coat around your shoulders, knees bent by the hearth. The old ritual begins again. You coax the embers with shavings, then kindling, then a patient breath through parted lips until flame returns. It catches in the pine with a quick bright flutter and then steadies in the oak. Smoke, sweet resin, warm ash. The scents mix at once and begin turning the cabin from a sleeping shell back into a living room. Water heats. Coffee follows. Breakfast is plain, because plain breakfasts keep turning up in honest history whether anyone finds them poetic or not. You fry coarse cakes from cornmeal and water, crisping the edges in a little grease until the smell grows rich and toasty. The first bite is hot enough to burn your tongue, which feels almost encouraging. Something alive enough to burn must be doing its job. After eating an almond, you clear the frost from the window and study the clearing. The new snow has softened every line. The path to the shelter is half buried again. The woodpile looks rounded and quiet, like sleeping cattle. The trees beyond stand in grey ranks under a white load, their trunks dark and damp with cold. No clear tracks remain near the edge of the yard. The night has erased its own handwriting. That should comfort you more than it does. You step outside with a shovel, and the air meets you with a deep, clean stillness. Snow creaks under your boots. The sound is softer now than on the bitterest mornings, less squeak than packed whisper. The mule huffs at your approach, ears flicking, his breath rising in pale clouds. You clear the path, shake snow from the shelter roof, and carry him feed. He noses the hay, then turns hopeful eyes toward your coat pocket as though grain might appear there through moral pressure alone. It does not. He seems disappointed in both you and the age you live in. Once the simple outdoor duties are done, you go back inside before the damp can settle too far into your sleeves. Today feels like an indoor day, the sort that asks for economy, less roaming, less chopping at a distance, more work done within the reach of the fire. You close the door, hang up your coat, and stand a moment near the hearth while feeling returns to your fingers in slow, pricking waves. The cabin smells especially alive today. Coffee grounds, drying wool, cedar from the branches near the shelter, the scent clinging faintly to your gloves, soot warmed by the fire, and underneath it all, the steady aroma of timber itself. Old sap locked into the walls and released little by little whenever the room grows warm. A frontier cabin is never scentless. It keeps a layered memory of every meal, every storm, every season of smoke. You decide on soup, not because it is glamorous, but because a pot can sit and murmur while your hands are busy elsewhere. Beans go in first, with water, a heel of salt pork, a pinch of dried onion, and the last of a wrinkled carrot that has held on in admirable decline. Soon the kettle beside it is singing softly, while the soup pot gives off slower, deeper sounds, occasional blips and the faint tap of its lid. The room fills with an earthy, savoury smell that seems to settle low in the air and promise you that evening will not be entirely unreasonable. With the meal left to its own gentle progress, you turn to the table and lay out the day's smaller work. A loose button, a torn seam at the cuff, a cracked wooden spoon handle that might be wrapped with cord for one more useful season, a lantern hook that needs straightening. There is a special kind of winter labour made of little salvations, not building, not hunting, just keeping ordinary objects from giving up before you do. You thread a needle and begin with the cuff. The shirt fabric is coarse beneath your fingers, rubbed thin at the fold where wrist meets sleeve. You stitch slowly in the firelight, drawing the thread through with short, careful pulls. Outside, snow taps once against the shutter and slides away. Inside, the only sounds are the fire and the whisper of thread through cloth. It is strange how peaceful mending can feel when there is nowhere else you are expected to be. Many 19th century households lived by repair in a way later generations often only pretend to admire. Clothes were turned, patched, pieced, and handed down until the original garment existed mostly as a rumour. Tools were rehandled, boots were resoled, blankets were rebound. A cracked pot might survive by wire, a broken chair by pegs, a harness by new stitching in old holes. Scholars can estimate material scarcity from records and surviving objects, but the full daily patience behind such repairs is harder to measure. A ledger can list purchases, it cannot record the hours spent persuading tired things to continue. The spoon comes next. You shave the handle smooth where it's split, then bind it tightly with waxed cord. pulling each turn hard so the wood closes under the pressure. When you test it, it feels clumsy but firm enough. Good. The Frontier has never been a strict perfectionist. Function first. Beauty can arrive later, assuming beauty is willing to work. The soup begins to smell stronger, richer, pork fat and beans and onion, with that sweet low warmth only long simmering produces. You stir it once, scraping the bottom of the pot with a wooden ladle. Steam curls up into your face and fogs the air briefly around you. The surface rolls lazily. Little eyes of grease shine in amber circles. You taste a spoonful, burn your lip, and decide it needs time. Most worthwhile things do, though soup is kind enough to prove it before philosophy catches up. By midday, the light outside has flattened into one long grey afternoon. There is no clear sun, only brightness spread evenly over snow and cloud. It enters through the frosted window in a pale wash that gives the room just enough shape to work without candlelight. You use it well. On the shelf above the table, your few belongings sit in orderly rows: tin cup, powder horn, soap, Bible, a little bundle of fishing line and hooks, the packet of letters. Seeing them so neatly arranged gives you a small private satisfaction. Order in a small room can feel like order in the mind, even when the mind is plainly too clever to be fooled for long. You pull the letters closer but do not open one. Instead, you take out a scrap of paper and the ink, setting both on the table. Writing home, or toward home, is a different sort of labour. It asks you to choose what version of your life to send across distance. The truthful one, the cheerful one, the one that does not worry anyone. You dip the pen and begin. The nib scratches softly. You write about the weather first because weather is always honest company. You mention the snow, the cabin holding well enough, the mule eating properly, wood remaining sufficient if handled carefully. You do not say too much about the wolves. Or rather, you mention tracks but not the way your stomach tightened when you saw them. People far away can do very little with the full texture of another person's unease. Better to send facts than shadows. As the words gather on the page, the room grows even quieter around them. Writing has a way of narrowing the world to paper, hand, and thought. The fire still speaks in little pops, the soup still murmurs, but everything else draws back. You become aware of your own posture, the slight ache in your shoulders, the dry feel of the pen shaft against your fingers. Ink smells faintly sharp and metallic. The paper is soft at the edges where it has been handled before. Outside, a single raven croaks from somewhere beyond the trees, deep and rough as an old hinge. You pause midway and stare at the window. The snow beyond it is now so bright against the dark woods that the contrast makes your eyes ache. Silence grows physical on days like this. It seems to gather in the rafters and under the table and between the logs. Not empty silence, dense silence. A thing with weight. You could almost believe it hangs from the loft pegs beside the drying clothes. Solitude on the Frontier is often described either as noble independence or crushing misery, depending on who is doing the remembering and whether supper has gone badly. The truth was probably less dramatic and more peculiar. Long stretches alone could sharpen observation, routine, and inward conversation until even small noises or thoughts took on unusual importance. Some people found that clarifying, others found it oppressive. Many likely experienced both, often before noon. You return to the letter and finish it with careful practical lines. Health fair. Supplies moderate. Weather hard but manageable. Such phrases smooth over a great deal. Then you sand the wet ink lightly, fold the sheet, and tuck it with the others. It may travel weeks from now, or longer, or never. Still, it exists. That matters. A written page proves that your thoughts took shape in this small room on this grey winter day. At last the soup is ready. You ladle it into a bowl and sit near the hearth, cradling the warmth in both hands before the first spoonful. The taste is simple and excellent. Beans gone soft, broth thickened by long cooking, pork lending salt and depth, the carrot nearly dissolved, but honourable in defeat. You eat slowly, feeling heat spread through your chest and shoulders. Outside, the day seems to hold its breath. After the meal, drowsiness tries its luck, A warm fire, a full stomach, and grey weather make an excellent conspiracy. You allow yourself a brief spell in the chair, with your boots near the hearth and your head tipped back against the wall. Not sleep exactly. Something looser. A drifting state in which the firelight pulses behind your eyelids, and the cabin's ordinary sounds become very large. A soft click in the chimney, a board easing in the loft, the gentle tick of cooling metal. Your mind slides around without much discipline, touching memories, unfinished chores, odd scraps of old talk heard years ago in other winters. There were frontier tales that certain nights, especially snowy still ones, made the woods strangely near to the house in spirit as well as distance. Some people hung sprigs of evergreen above the door against bad luck. Others swore by iron under the bed or a horseshoe at the threshold. One old woman in a settlement not far from a trading road supposedly insisted that whistling indoors after dark invited hungry things closer, though whether she meant wolves, misfortune, or unmarried men was never entirely clear. Such beliefs sound quaint until weather closes in and daylight shortens. Then they begin to resemble practical poetry. You wake fully with a start, not from any loud sound, but from the sudden awareness that the fire has burned lower. The room is cooler. Afternoon has dimmed toward evening, the grey outside deepening into blue. For a second you are disoriented, as though the silence has shifted while you are not looking. Then the cabin reassembles around you. Table, bed, hanging shirt, pot, rifle, all in place. You rise at once, add wood to the hearth, and stir the coals until flames leap back. The action steadies you. You move on to the next useful thing and the next. Wash the bowl. Refill the water bucket from the pail. Bring in more split wood from the stack by the door. Check the mule and give him hay before dark. These tasks do not ask for interpretation, which is one of their best qualities. Outside. The evening air feels a touch softer than the past few nights, though only a fool would call it mild. Snow clouds still hang low. The clearing has taken on that dusky violet shade that makes every stump and branch look briefly enchanted, or suspicious, depending on temperament. The mule chews with immense seriousness. His hide is warm beneath your palm. Far away, so far that you almost doubt it, comes a single wolf call from deep in the timber. Not close, not urgent. Just a note rising and falling across the snow. You listen. The sound does not repeat. Back inside, you bar the door and light a candle because the last of the daylight is nearly gone. The small flame adds a gentler glow to the stronger fire, touching the shelf, the letters, the mended cuff, the bound spoon handle. Little proofs of the day's labour. Little signs that your hours were spent holding things together. The soup pot still smells faintly of onion and smoke. Your drying clothes hang motionless near the loft ladder. The whole cabin seems wrapped in a thick hushed atmosphere. Not lonely exactly, but self-contained. You sit at the table with your hands around the last cup of coffee, though weaker now, and let the quiet settle. It presses close, but not cruelly. More like a heavy wool blanket laid over the room. Beyond the window, snow and woods and darkness gather into one seamless field. Inside, the fire burns steady. The candle stands small and brave, and your patched, mended, simmered, written through day comes to rest in a silence so complete it almost feels like another kind of shelter. You wake to the sound of the wind beginning before dawn, not as a sudden assault, but as a low force gathering its will in the trees. At first it moves like distant surf along the timberline, a long hush rising and falling beyond the walls. Then it comes closer. The cabin answers in its own language. A beam gives a slow groan. The shutter trembles once in its frame. Ash stirs faintly in the hearth. You lie still for a moment under the blankets, eyes open in the dimness, listening as the weather decides to become personal. When you sit up, the air feels colder than yesterday. The fire has shrunk to scattered embers, and reviving it takes more care than usual. Drafts are changing in the chimney. Smoke wants to hesitate in the room before climbing. You kneel with kindling cupped in both hands, coaxing flame from stubborn red beneath the ash. The first catch is weak, the second brightens. A pine knot thrown in at the right moment flares with a resinous hiss, and suddenly the hearth glows properly again, light pushing back the dark corners. The smell is sharp and sweet, almost medicinal, and it fills the room with the comforting seriousness of work begun early. By the time water is warming, snow has started. It comes first as a dry tapping at the shutter and roof, then a soft, steady brushing. You clear a circle in the window and find the world already half vanished. The clearing is a blur of grey-white movement. Trees at the far edge show only as smudged vertical shapes, their tops lost in the low sky. The mule shelter remains visible, though its outline looks uncertain, edges softened by blowing snow. The wind pushes the flakes nearly sideways. A hard day is arriving with excellent confidence. You eat a quick breakfast near the fire, not out of appetite so much as discipline. Corn cakes again, this time with pork grease rubbed into them while hot, and coffee strong enough to make your pulse feel briefly argumentative. The food tastes smoky and plain. Good enough. Storms do not care whether meals are memorable. Then you prepare. That is the real business of a frontier storm. Not fear. Preparation. You bring more wood from the inside stack close to the hearth, and add a second armful from the covered pile outside while the weather is still merely bad rather than impossible. The moment you open the door, snow blasts in across the threshold and swirls over the floorboards. It stings your face and fills the air with a raw mineral smell, clean and bitter. The path to the woodpile is already drifting over. You move quickly, shoulders bent, boots punching through the fresh layer beneath the gale. By the time you wrestle the split logs inside and bar the door again, your coat is powdered white and your eyelashes hold tiny beads of meltwater. You stamp off the snow, hang the coat to dry and stand near the fire until the sting leaves your fingers. Outside, the wind strengthens further, striking the cabin in blunt waves. The roof creaks. Loose snow rasps along the walls. Something small taps once at the chimney stone. Perhaps a branch whipped by the gusts. It is the sort of sound that makes your head turn before reason catches up. The storm, apparently, enjoys knocking first and introducing itself later. Cabins like this were not built for elegance in weather, only resistance. A good log wall could take more punishment than its rough appearance suggested, especially when the notches were sound and the roof properly weighted. Yet much depended on who built it, what timber they used, and how quickly necessity forced the work. Some memoirs make winter cabins seem nearly heroic, snug little fortresses against the elements. Others describe smoky, leaking boxes that shook through every gale. Historians still debate how much of that contrast reflects real variation and how much comes from pride, misery, or the desire to make one's own past sound more dramatic at supper. Your cabin, for now, behaves honourably. You decide to give the mule extra attention before the storm grows worse. There is no avoiding the trip. You pull on coat, scarf, gloves, and hat, lift the lantern though it is not yet fully dark, and step outside into a world made almost instantly hostile. Wind tears at the flame through the glass. Snow lashes your cheeks in fine, sharp grains. The shelter, which from the window seemed merely close, now feels absurdly far away through the blur and noise. You push forward with one arm raised against your face, boots sinking into drifts that have begun to form knee-deep in places. The mule is there, huddled under the lean roof, ears back, body turned from the gale. Snow has gathered along his flank where the shelter leaves him partly exposed. He gives a low, uneasy sound when you appear, then presses his muzzle toward your shoulder, as if asking whether you caused this nonsense. You check the ropes, shake snow from the blanket over his back, and shove more hay under cover where he can reach it without stepping out into the blast. His warm animal smell rises through the cold, hay and hide and breath, startlingly vivid against the storm's empty sharpness. For a moment you consider leading him inside the cabin. The thought comes naturally, and with it the immediate vision of chewed blankets, kicked stools, and a room transformed into a barn with theological disagreements. No, the shelter must do. You reinforce its windward side with the cedar branches you cut earlier, and pack snow along the lower edge to block the draft. Rough work, but useful. Then you pat the mule's neck once, more for your own reassurance than his, and fight your way back to the door. Inside again. You're shaking from cold and exertion. Snow melts off your sleeves onto the floor. Your gloves are soaked. You strip them off, hang everything near the hearth, and hold your hands out to the flames until heat returns in painful little pins. It is always slightly offensive how much a person can suffer on a walk of 20 steps. Yet that is winter's special talent. It magnifies distance and makes every errand pay double. By midday, the storm has fully taken possession of the clearing. You can barely see beyond the nearest stump through the window. Snow races past in thick, slanting sheets. The wind has found every angle of the cabin and begun testing them one by one. The chimney moans at times, drawing hard, then suddenly too little. The shutters give an occasional rattle. Once, a powerful gust makes the whole wall behind the bed shiver faintly. Not enough to panic you, but enough to remind you that wood is only tree persuaded into temporary obedience. You keep the fire strong but not wasteful. That balance matters. Burn too fast and you boast now, regret later. Burn too low and the cabin chills before evening. So you feed the hearth with measured patience. One dense log, one smaller split, a pine knot when extra flame is needed. Soon the room is warmer than the morning, though the floor near the door remains cruel, and thin streams of cold still creep in where the walls are least cooperative. You stuff fresh moss into one gap and wedgecloth into another. It helps a little. Winter notices and remains unimpressed. With the storm hemming you in, indoor time grows strangely elastic. Minutes stretch. Sounds loom larger. You make a stew from beans, salt pork, and flour thickened into a rough dumpling broth. The pot bubbles steadily, and its smell becomes the centre of the room, savoury and heavy, carrying onion, smoke, and fat into every corner. You sit by the hearth sharpening the axe while it cooks, the whetstone passing over the blade in slow, even strokes. The sound is soft and intimate under the deeper roar of the weather. Now and then you pause to listen for anything distinct beneath the storm. That is the difficult part. Wind can imitate almost anything when it wants to be annoying. It whines like an animal, thumps like a hand, scratches like claws, and rushes over the roof with the strange padded speed of feet overhead. More than one frontier tale began with a storm noise later improved into something supernatural or predatory. A branch dragged by the gale became a spirit at the shutter. Loose hides snapping on a line became wings at the wall. A hungry settler with too little sleep became a witness of terrifying reliability. Solitude and weather are accomplished playwrights. Even knowing this, you still look up sharply when the mule cries out. It is not a loud sound. More a sharp, distressed bray carried thinly through the wind, but it reaches you clearly enough to make every muscle tighten. You're on your feet at once, spoon abandoned, rifle in hand before the thought finishes forming. Then you stop. Listen. The wind booms against the cabin. Snow scrapes along the wall. Nothing else. No second cry. No sudden scramble. No obvious impact. You stand there in the firelight with the rifle stock hard against your palm, hearing your own breath and the blood moving in your ears. Another minute passes and then another. At last you lower the muzzle, set the gun within reach and go to the window. It shows you almost nothing. The glass is blurred by frost inside and snow outside. A double conspiracy. You clear it with your sleeve and catch only a brief pale shape where the shelter ought to be. No movement. No clear sign. Perhaps the mule shifted under the blast and objected. Perhaps something brushed the shelter and moved on. Perhaps the storm itself simply found the right angle to sound like trouble. Uncertainty is not dramatic, but it is exhausting. You decide not to rush out blindly into that white chaos unless forced. That is not cowardice. It is arithmetic. If the animal screams again, if the shelter breaks, if there is unmistakable commotion, then you go. Otherwise you wait, alert, and ready. People on the frontier survived, partly by courage and partly by not spending it foolishly. To keep your hands from fidgeting, you eat the stew while it is hot. It is thick and salty. The dumplings dense enough to suggest they might stop a bullet. Perfect storm food. Steam fogs the air before your face. Each spoonful restores a little steadiness. Afterward, you wash the bowl, refill the kettle, and check the roof pegs and shutters from inside. The cabin holds. Again and again. It holds. By late afternoon, the light outside has dimmed to a ghostly grey. The true night has not yet arrived. Storm days make their own hours. The room glows amber from the fire and the single candle you finally light. Wax scent joins the smoke. Shadows jump in the corners. Your drying clothes flutter slightly from the drafts, giving the peculiar impression of silent company. You sit at the table and try to read a page from the Bible, but the wind keeps pulling your attention away with every surge. Then, beneath one long rising gust, you hear it, a howl. Not imagination this time, not chimney noise or branch scrape. A real wolf call, stretched thin by wind but unmistakable, coming from somewhere close enough that the hairs at the back of your neck rise before the sound even ends. Then a second answers, lower, farther off perhaps, or only bent by the storm. You set the book down and do not move for several breaths. The old stories return at once, whether invited or not. Wolves testing the edges of clearings during hard weather. Packs following shelter lines where livestock scent collects. Hungry animals made bolder by deep snow. It is impossible to know how many such tales were embroidered beyond honesty, but not all of them were nonsense. Storms drove creatures toward opportunity, just as they drove people toward fire and walls. Historians continue to argue over how often wolves truly threatened frontier cabins, since evidence blurs between livestock raids, winter panic, and inherited fear. Yet on a night like this, scholarly caution offers only modest comfort. The mule shifts again outside, you hear the muted thud through the storm, so you prepare the room as if for company you do not want. More wood beside the hearth, rifle loaded and close, knife on the table, iron pan hung where your hand can seize it. Another pine knot added to the fire for sudden light. The cabin brightens sharply, filling with resin scent and moving shadows. Every object seems to lean into readiness. Outside, the howl comes again. Nearer, not at the door, not pacing the wall, but nearer than before, cut short this time by the wind. The storm swallows the rest. You sit by the fire in your coat and boots, lantern lit now as well, because more light feels wiser even if it does nothing. The room is warm at the centre and cold at the edges. Smoke threads upward. Snow rattles across the roof. Each gust makes the shutters shiver, then settle. Somewhere in the dark beyond the clearing, padded feet move through drifts, silent except for the voices they choose to give away. Evening deepens. The storm does not let up. The wolves do not fall completely silent. And you remain there in the small log room, watching flame, listening to wind, and trusting that wood, fire, and your own careful stubbornness will be enough to hold back the long white night pressing at the walls. You stay in the chair long after comfort has stopped being part of the arrangement. The fire gives generous heat to your knees and hands, but your back feels each stray draft that slips through the logs. The candle on the table has burned lower, its flame now smaller and steadier, as if even it has decided that too much movement would be wasteful on a night like this. Outside, the storm still presses past the cabin in heavy gusts, though the wildest force has begun to break into uneven surges. Between those surges, the silence feels almost deliberate. Then the wolves call again, one voice first, drawn out and haunting, somewhere beyond the mule shelter. Another answers from farther off, its tone rougher, shorter, less like a song and more like a statement. The sound enters through the walls, not as a clean note, but as a tremor in the whole atmosphere of the room. It seems to vibrate inside the floorboards. You do not flinch this time, not outwardly, inwardly. Every thought sits up straighter. You grip the cup in your hand and find it empty. That feels mildly insulting, so you rise, set the kettle closer to the flames, and decide on another hot drink. Not coffee now. You have no wish to spend the darkest hours with your pulse marching around the cabin like a military band. Instead, you pinch more mint into the pot and add a shaving of dried ginger from a twist of paper in your stores, a luxury that, small, but real. Soon the steam lifts in bright herbal curls. The smell cuts through smoke and damp wool, clean and sharp enough to clear the head. Hot drink in hand, you settle again by the fire and let the storm speak itself out around you. There is a peculiar kind of thinking that belongs only to long evenings in isolation. Thoughts do not arrive in proper order. They drift in like flakes through a cracked shutter, one landing near another by chance rather than logic. You think of roofs repaired with green wood and optimism. You think of muddy roads in spring, and how men always claim a wagon can get through just before it very clearly cannot. You think of the embarrassing confidence with which people explain weather they did not personally invent. Then, without warning, your mind turns toward older, softer things. A kitchen somewhere warmer than this. A lamp trimmed low. Someone humming while peeling apples. The dull shine of pewter plates on a shelf. A chair with one loose rung that everyone knew about and nobody fixed for 3 years. Memory rarely offers grand scenes first. It sends back corners, smells, small domestic embarrassments. You can remember, all at once, the exact sound of a spoon striking a crockery bowl in another house and another winter. The sound is so clear it almost feels present. You smile without meaning to, and the smile fades, not from sorrow exactly, but from distance. Loneliness in frontier writing often appears disguised as practicality. A diarist notes weather, repairs, illness, hunting, feed, and fuel. Then tucked between those plain entries comes some brief crack in the voice. Felt low today. Very still-housed. Missed company. Such little phrases tell more than long speeches might. Historians know isolation-shaped frontier life deeply, but its exact emotional texture is hard to recover because people were not always trained to narrate themselves. Many simply kept working. Silence became both burden and habit. You understand that now with a closeness that no printed sentence can quite manage. The fire settles inward, and you feed it another log. Sparks leap up in a bright rush, swirl in the draught, and vanish toward the chimney throat. For a few moments the cabin glows more vividly. The mended spoon on the shelf catches the light. The damp clothes hanging near the loft ladder cast long, wavering shadows. The Bible on the table looks almost gilded at the page edges. Then the brightness softens again into amber. The wolves do not howl for a while. That absence changes the room just as much as their voices did. You find yourself listening toward the silence, trying to decide whether it means they have moved off or only grown quiet. Quiet wolves seem in some ways more troubling than loud ones. At least a howl announces itself. Silence leaves you to supply your own possibilities, and the human mind is a restless servant in the dark. To steady yourself, you begin talking aloud, softly, as if commenting on the work of your own hands. More wood there, kettle full, lantern trimmed, door barred, boots dry enough. It sounds absurd, and yet it helps. Words make shapes in the air. They push back a little against the pressure of too much inwardness. Some people in lonely places formed intense habits of speech with animals, tools, or the weather itself. Horses were consulted, kettles criticized, axes praised or insulted. A mule could become a full conversational partner, though usually one with a poor attitude. Was this eccentricity, necessity, or simply the normal human need for response? Probably all three. Frontier humour often grew from such conditions. When there was no audience, a person learned to become one. You set down the cup, and perhaps because the night has gone on long enough to make odd choices feel reasonable, untie the packet of letters again. Instead of reading one, you hold them all for a while, thumb-brushing the softened folds. The papers are different in weight and texture. One is smoother, another rougher, another thin enough to show the shadows of its writing through the back. The letters feel like proof that the world contains rooms beyond this one, voices beyond the wind, faces not made of shadow and flame. At last you open a different letter than the last one you read. The hand is larger and less careful. The writer wastes little time on graceful openings. Good. There is comfort in blunt affection. The page speaks of a harvest that turned middling after early promise, of a preacher who lost his place midway through a sermon and improvised for 20 embarrassing minutes, of a hog that escaped slaughter twice and became locally respected. You give a quiet laugh at that. It surprises you. The sound seems almost foreign in the cabin, like the arrival of a visitor. Then the wind answers with a long rattle over the roof, as if reminding you not to become frivolous. Frontier humour could be dry enough to preserve meat. People joked about weather, mishaps, poor cooking, stubborn livestock, marriages undertaken too quickly, and neighbours who borrowed more than they returned. It was not always polished wit. Often it was merely the determination to look at hardship and deny it the pleasure of a fully solemn audience. Gentle sarcasm, muttered into a beard or over a cookpot, may have kept more spirits alive than any speech on courage. You fold the letter again and place it aside. Then you notice the cabin smells more sharply than before. Smoke. Yes, but also hot metal, damp leather, tallow, the faint herbal freshness of mint, and something dusty from the loft where old hay still lingers in the boards. It is a dense and oddly intimate atmosphere, not pleasant in every note, perhaps, but thoroughly human. Outside is the vast cold blank. Inside is scent layered upon scent, all of it made or altered by your presence. The room has become a record of occupation as clear as any diary. The storm eases another degree. You hear it now less as a continuous force and more as wandering gusts. Snow still strikes the wall from time to time, but with softer hands. The chimney no longer moans so often. A branch sheds its load somewhere nearby with a cushioned thump. In the calmer gaps, you can hear tiny details again. The soft hiss when moisture in a log meets flame. The faint creak of the bed frame settling. The almost secret scratch of a mouse behind the far wall, conducting its own domestic affairs with total confidence. Then comes a sound from outside that is neither wind nor weather. A low short bark, not fox, too heavy, not the mule, too clipped. It comes once, near enough to sharpen your attention instantly. You set down the cup and listen. Nothing. Then a light crunch through snow, or perhaps only snow slipping from the roof edge. The distinction matters a great deal and is impossible to prove from where you sit. You rise and move to the window without the candle. Better to look from shadow. Your breath fogs the little clear place you scrape in the frost. At first the dark gives you nothing. Then, for the briefest moment, far out near the black line of the trees, two pale points catch the firelight leaking from the cabin. Eyes, they do not blaze dramatically. They do not rush forward. They simply appear, low to the ground and very still, then vanish as the head turns or the creature steps away. The whole sight lasts no more than a second. It is enough. You stay at the window, hardly breathing, waiting for them to return. They do not. The trees remain a dark fringe. Snow drifts through the gap in the clouds, faint and slow. The wind passes once through the pines with a long dry whisper. Nothing more. It may be a wolf. It may even be one alone, scouting while the others range farther, or perhaps not. Historians and naturalists have long warned against too much certainty in night observations, especially by firelight in weather. Distances shrink. Eyeshine deceives. Stumps become beasts. Beasts become shadows. Shadows become family legends. Yet it would take unusual optimism to decide you have seen nothing at all. You step back from the window and place your hand on the rifle, not lifting it, only touching the worn stock. The simple contact reassures you. Then you bank the fire a little higher, adding oak and one more resinous knot for brightness. The hearth answers with a stronger flame. Light fills the room, pushing the corners back. It is a practical act, but it also feels ceremonial, as if you are renewing a compact. Fire inside, dark outside. Let us keep the terms clear. Hours pass in small pieces after that. You doze and wake. You sit and listen. Once you recite a few lines from memory, not because you are pious at the moment, but because remembered words can occupy the mind better than worry can. Once you stand at the door with the iron pan in hand, convinced by some shift in the mule's movement that action is needed, only to hear him settle again with a heavy patient snort. On another occasion, the wolves howl from much farther off, and the sound no longer startles so much as deepens the sense of distance around you. They are there. You are here. That must be enough. Near what you guess to be the darkest part of the night, your thoughts wander towards scholarly doubts and old tales alike. How much of frontier endurance came from skill? How much from necessity? How much from luck? How many remembered winter nights were made grander by retelling? How many ordinary survivals vanished from record because nobody thought them worth mentioning? Historians still argue over daily emotional life on remote homesteads. Because evidence is thin, and often filtered through pride. Yet one thing seemed certain. People learned to live inside uncertainty without resolving it. They kept the fire. They checked the latch. They listened. Then they did it again. At length, the candle gutters so low that you pinch it out and trust the hearth alone. The cabin is dim now, bronze and red, shadows breathing on the walls. Your body feels heavy with tiredness, but your mind has worn itself quieter. The worst edge of vigilance has dulled into a steadier alertness. Outside, the storm has almost passed. The world beyond the door remains cold, occupied, and unknowable, but the roof still holds. The walls still stand. The mule still shifts from time to time in his shelter. The wolves, whether near or far, have not crossed the bright boundary of the fire. You lie down at last without undressing, boots loosened but still close, coat folded within reach. One hand rests atop the blanket, the other stays near the rifle. The mattress rustles softly beneath you. Your eyes follow the pulse of the hearth for a few slow moments more. Then the room, warm at its centre and ringed by darkness, begins to drift. The sounds grow farther apart. Wind in the trees, a faint crackle, a distant call that may be real or may already belong to dreaming. And while the night keeps its secrets beyond the logs, your thoughts soften into embers, glowing lower and lower until even worry seems too tired to continue. You wake before dawn to a cold so absolute it seems to have entered the cabin as a second structure. The room is still there, the walls, the table, the bed, the shelf, the hearth. Yet everything feels tighter, harder, more severe, as if the frost has drawn invisible lines through the air and stiffened them overnight. Your first breath stings the inside of your nose. Your second shows pale and ghost-like above the blanket. Even the little patch of skin between your shirt collar and jaw feels sharply aware of itself. This is the deepest freeze yet. The fire has not entirely died, but it has retreated into a mean red scatter beneath the ash. No generous bed of coals waits for you this morning, only a few hidden points of heat, grudging and small. You roll from the bed with the quick, unhappy decisiveness of a person who knows delay will improve nothing. The floor bites through stockings and boot soles alike. You crouch at the hearth, shoulders hunched, hands already dry with cold, and begin the old careful resurrection. Shavings, pine splinters, breath, patience. The flame catches reluctantly, falters, then grips. A pine knot helps, bursting with bright resin light and a sharp scent like green wood and medicine. Smoke hesitates in the chimney before the draught takes it. Your eyes water. You cough into your sleeve. The whole process feels less like lighting a fire than negotiating with a difficult clerk who insists on unnecessary paperwork. Still, by degrees, the hearth wakes. Orange spreads beneath the blackened wood. The room gains a little shape, a little mercy. You set water on at once and then go to the window. Frost has sealed much of the pane in pale white feathers so thick they look painted on. You clear a circle with your palm and see dawn not as light, but as a faint thinning of darkness over the clearing. The sky above the treetops is iron grey with a hard glassy cast. No new snow falls. The storm has passed and left behind its colder, crueler cousin. Every outline beyond the window appears sharpened. The wood pile, the mule shelter, the cut path, the black bars of tree trunks, a world pared down to essentials. You dress in extra layers, adding the wool vest you had meant to save and wrapping your scarf twice around your neck. Breakfast is a serious affair this morning. You cut more pork than usual and fry it slowly, letting the fat render fully, then warm bread in the pan until it soaks up every useful drop. Coffee follows, strong and bitter. The smell of it rises through the chill like something stern and trustworthy. You eat standing near the fire, listening to the pan hiss and the kettle murmur, feeling heat move into you by slow stages. Outdoors, the cold feels astonishing. The first breath hits like swallowed needles. The snow underfoot screams in that deep brittle squeak that belongs only to severe temperatures. The sound is almost metallic. Trees crack occasionally in the distance with sharp rifle-like reports as sap and wood contract under the strain. The whole forest sounds tense, as though the timber itself would prefer a blanket and a warm brick at its feet. The mule greets you with a hoarse, impatient noise. Frost outlines the whiskers around his muzzle and rims the edge of his blanket where his breath has risen and frozen back again. You carry him warm mash made from meal and water, a kindness worth the trouble on a morning like this. Steam lifts from the bucket as he eats, and for a moment the smell of grain and animal heat overwhelms the cold. It is a dense, earthy smell, almost sweet and deeply comforting. You rub his neck and feel the thickness of winter coat beneath your glove, the solid life there, steady and enduring. Then you check the water. The bucket inside the cabin has skinned over with ice despite the fire. Outside at the creek, the open run has narrowed even more, black water trapped between shelves of white and blue. You take the hatchet and go there carefully, following the packed track. The air in the trees is so still now that every small sound seems magnified. Your own boots, the brittle clink of ice striking ice when you chip at the frozen edge, the slow, dark gurgle beneath. Nothing wastes motion in this cold. Even the creek sounds reluctant. You fill the bucket and nearly lose feeling in your fingers despite the gloves. Wet at these temperatures is a personal insult delivered by nature with special attention. When a little water splashes over the rim and onto your mitten, you curse softly and tuck the hand under your arm at once. The path back feels longer than it should. That is another trick of deep freeze. It makes ordinary distances behave badly. On the way, you notice deer tracks crossing the clearing. Several animals passed before dawn, their hoof marks punched deep into the crust. They moved quickly, angling toward the creek and back to the timber. No wolf tracks fresh enough to alarm you today, though that proves little. In this sort of cold, even predators conserve effort. Hunger is one force, temperature is another. The woods are full of negotiations invisible from the cabin door. You bring the water in, hang your wet mitten near the hearth, and stand with both hands extended to the flames until the ache begins. It comes slowly, then all at once. A sharp, crawling pain in the fingertips as warmth returns. You grit your teeth and wait it out. There is no graceful way to thaw. It is simply something you endure while pretending not to resent the universe. The day's labour cannot be postponed, though every instinct suggests otherwise. The wood supply needs enlarging. In weather like this, the fire eats faster, and night comes no gentler. So you take the axe and head for the stack near the edge of the trees, choosing rounds you cut earlier and dragged closer for just such need. Good thinking. That one of the few comforts of frontier life is discovering that your past self was, on occasion, not an idiot. The axe handle feels almost too cold to hold at first. You work anyway. Set the round. Strike. Lift. Strike again. The wood splits cleanly in the deep freeze, the crack sounding sharper than usual. Chips fly bright and hard. The scent rising from fresh split oak is stronger somehow in the cold. Sweet and clean, with that faint tannic depth that speaks of stored summers. Soon your shoulders warm, though the air against your face remains raw. You pace yourself carefully. Sweat is the enemy now. Too much effort, too much dampness. And the walk back to the cabin becomes its own punishment. Frontier endurance is often described in broad heroic phrases, but most of it was a matter of measurement. How much wood? How much effort? How wet are your sleeves? How long can the mule stay out before needing more cover? How much flour remains if weather traps you another week? Romantic courage is all very well, but arithmetic keeps the fire going. Historians still debate how often settlers dramatize self-reliance in memory, because accounts written later tend to polish hardship into virtue. Yet beneath the polish, the numbers remain. Fuel, food, shelter, time. By noon, your body feels worked in the best and worst ways at once. Muscles loose from labour, fingers sore, back tired, face tight from cold. You carry in the last armload and stack it near the hearth, then strip off your outer coat and let it steam gently in the rising warmth. The cabin now smells of fresh split wood, coffee grounds, drying wool, and hot iron. It is a strong, honest smell. You would not bottle it for polite company, but here it means life is proceeding correctly. Dinner becomes thick porridge with a bit of pork chopped small through it. Less elegant than efficient. You stir it while watching the doorway as if someone might arrive. Though you know no one will. That thought lands differently today. Not sadly, exactly. More as a plain fact. Isolation has worn down its dramatic edges and become routine. The cabin needs things. You provide them. The day asks for effort. You spend it. The world beyond the walls remains large and indifferent. You no longer expect it to explain itself. This may be the strangest transformation of all. What first felt like courage now feels more like habit. You do not rise each morning as the noble hero of your own winter saga. You rise because the fire must be coaxed, the mule fed, the water fetched, the wood split, the pot stirred. Survival becomes less a shining act than a sequence of plain motions repeated until they shape the hours. There is something humbling in that. Also something restful. A routine makes fewer demands on the imagination than fear does. In the afternoon, you turn to the small repairs that cold reveals. A draft has reappeared low on the north wall where the old chinking shrank back. You knead damp clay between gloved fingers and press it into the crack with moss behind it, sealing the gap as best you can. The clay is cold and slick, smelling faintly of earth locked away beneath the frost outside. A stool leg wobbles, so you shave a thin wedge and hammer it firm. One roof peg near the loft ladder has worked loose. You drive it back with careful blows, listening to the dry knock of wood on wood. The sound carries warmly through the cabin. There are no wolves today. No howls. No tracks fresh enough to trouble the mind. Yet the silence of the woods feels no less complete. In fact, perhaps it feels more complete for their absence. Life beyond the walls has gone still with the cold. Birds are scarce. Even the usual chatter from squirrels has disappeared. Once, late in the afternoon, a raven passes overhead and gives a single croaking call, dark and rough against the bright hard sky. Then, nothing again. You step outside only once more before dusk, and even that feels like an extravagance. The air has somehow grown colder still. The snow in the clearing glows faintly blue under the sinking light. The mule takes his hay with solemn determination, the steam of his breath hanging longer than usual before fading. At the edge of the woods, the tree line stands black and unwelcoming, each trunk cut sharply against the snow. Beauty survives here, certainly, but it has stopped pretending to be friendly. Inside, evening comes early and decisively. You light a candle sooner than on milder nights and keep the fire full. The room glows gold and red against the dark window. The kettle sends up a steady ribbon of steam. Your shirt sleeves are rolled while you mend the strap on a feed sack. Needle in hand, thread waxed and strong. The work is small, rhythmic, calming. Through the wall comes the faintest outside sound now and then. Perhaps settling ice, perhaps a branch shifting under its own frost. Nothing more. You think, while sewing, that this is what winter has done. It has thinned life down to its grain. Food, heat, shelter, light, work, rest. There is no extra language around it anymore. The cabin has taught you its severe economy. So has the weather. So have the long nights. You no longer waste much energy on wondering whether this is hard. Of course it is hard. That question has exhausted itself. Some scholars argue that prolonged hardship often dulls fear, not because danger lessens, but because constant vigilance cannot remain feverish forever. It settles into baseline awareness, a quieter mode of attention. That seems right. The mind cannot ring bells all season. Eventually it learns to watch without shouting. On a frontier winter evening, that change might look like calm from the outside. From within, it feels more like wear and practice tied together. Supper is the last of the soup thickened again. Richer now, with the broth reduced and the flavours packed closer together. You eat slowly, almost absently, while the candle flame leans now and then in a faint draught. The spoon taps the bowl in a soft, regular rhythm. Firelight moves across the log walls. Your boots dry near the hearth. On the shelf, the letters wait in their bundle, not open tonight. Company of that sort asks for a softness you do not quite have left this evening. Instead, you sit with a cup of hot water and ginger, letting the warmth move through your hands. Outside, The dark settles fully over the clearing. The roof holds. The door is barred. The wood stack stands ready. The mule shifts once in his shelter, and then grows still. No howl lifts from the timber. No snow strikes the shutter. The cold simply remains, vast and silent, pressing at the edges of the cabin with a patience that almost deserves admiration. At last you bank the fire for the night. Larger logs laid close, coals drawn inward, ashes settled just so. The work is practiced now, nearly automatic. Then you stand for a moment in the dim room, looking at the low glow in the hearth and the candle's smaller light upon the table. This is enough, you think. Not plenty, not comfort in any extravagant sense, just enough. And perhaps that is the frontier's sternest lesson. Enough can be a very solid thing. You crawl into bed with a slow heaviness of honest fatigue. The blankets feel cold, then tolerable, then gradually kind. Your hands smell faintly of smoke, clay, and leather. Your shoulders ache in broad, warm lines from the axe. Outside, the deepest freeze of the season settles over the clearing and the silent black trees beyond. Inside, breath by breath, the cabin keeps its little store of warmth, and you drift towards sleep not with triumph, but with the quiet stubbornness that has become your most faithful companion. Near the darkest hour, you wake without knowing exactly why. No howl has pulled you upright. No branch has struck the wall. No dream lingers with enough force to explain the sudden opening of your eyes. You simply surface into the cold, dim room and lie there for a moment, listening. The fire still glows in the hearth. Not brightly, but with a steady red strength under the ash. The candle has long gone out. The cabin is full of that peculiar night hush in which every small sound seems both close and far away at once. Then you hear it, a faint shifting crunch outside, followed by a silence. You do not move immediately. Years of civilization, such as they are, might encourage a person to leap about in unnecessary alarm, but the frontier teaches a slower sort of caution. You listen first. A second soft crunch comes from beyond the door. Then a pause long enough to make you wonder whether you imagined it. The room feels tighter all at once, as if the dark outside has pressed closer to the logs. You slide one hand toward the rifle. The stock is cool and smooth beneath your palm. You sit up carefully, blankets rustling with a dry whisper, and angle your head toward the sound. Nothing now except the low breathing of the coals and, somewhere in the loft, a board easing under the cold. Your own breath seems too loud. You rein it in. The silence continues. Then, out in the clearing, the mule gives a short, uneasy snort. That decides matters. You rise from the bed, shoulders already tense, and step softly across the boards in your stockings. The floor's cold reaches through them like a warning. At the hearth you stoop, add one pine knot to the coals, and watch it catch with a bright resin flare. More light fills the room, orange and restless, sending shadows up the walls. You do not want full blaze yet, only enough to see without becoming a glowing lantern for anything outside. The mule shifts again, rope creaks, hay rustles. You move to the window in darkness, keeping clear of the firelight where you can. The frost is heavy, but one corner of the pane remains thin enough to scrape with your thumbnail. You clear a narrow space and peer out into the last cold stretch of night. At first the yard gives you almost nothing. A white drift, a black post, the blurred shape of the shelter. The sky above the trees is not fully dark now, though not yet dawn either. A pale, hard grey lies behind the branches, just enough to shape the world in charcoal tones. You keep looking. Then you see movement. A shape glides near the far side of the mule shelter, low and deliberate. Then another, grey on grey, so subtle they almost vanish when you try to fix them directly. Wolves, 2 at least, perhaps more beyond the angle of the structure. They are not charging, not snarling, not behaving with the melodrama that stories prefer. They are simply there, investigating, patient as cold itself. You feel fear, certainly, but not the wild kind. This is sharper, steadier. the sort that measures distance, light, and timing. The mule tosses his head and stamps. One of the wolves pauses, lifts its muzzle, and stands still enough that you can make out the pale line of its chest against the snow. It has the composed look of a creature entirely at home in this hour. That calm is almost the worst part. Frenzy would seem easier to answer. On winter frontiers, animals and people often met under circumstances shaped less by malice than by hunger and weather. Wolves trailing settlement edges, drawn by livestock's scent or scraps, did occur. Yet the line between simple curiosity and real danger remains difficult to recover from old accounts. Some writers inflated every glimpse into a siege. Others downplayed obvious risk to flatter their own composure. Historians still argue over how boldly wolves approached isolated shelters, especially where deep snow limited game. Much depended on local conditions, the animals involved, and the witness doing the remembering. You know only what is in front of you. You act quickly now, the iron pan by the door, the bent spoon, the rifle tucked under your arm. You set the gun within reach of the threshold, lift the pan, and draw one long breath. Then you pull the latch just enough to fling the door open a crack and beat the pan hard with the spoon. The crash explodes into the clearing. It is a hideous sound, metallic and sudden, all the more violent after such silence. The mule jerks. One wolf springs backward at once, a shadow thrown sideways through the snow. The other wheels and vanishes behind the shelter. You strike the pan again, shouting now, voice rough and full. The noise tears out into the pre-dawn air, ridiculous and effective. The cabin door shudders in the rush of cold, and you slam it closed after a few seconds. Heart pounding, ears ringing. Outside, all becomes still. You stand with the pan in one hand and the spoon in the other, breathing hard and listening for any immediate return. None comes. The cold that entered through the open crack pours over the floorboards and bites your ankles. Your fingers sting. The pan hangs heavy at your side like a piece of captured thunder. After a moment, you set it down and reclaim the rifle. No further sound. The mule gives one last restless snort, then begins the slower shifting noise of an animal settling. You wait several more breaths before returning to the window. The clearing seems empty now. The shelter stands half buried in pale snow. The tree line watches in silence. If the wolves remain nearby, they keep to shadow too deep for your eyes to sort. You do not lie back down. Some nights end sleep by decree. This is one of them. Instead, you kneel by the hearth and feed it proper wood, building the fire higher until the room regains its centre. The resin smell of the pine knot gives way to the deeper sweet heat of oak. Light spreads warmly across the table and bed frame. The little drama at the door begins to settle into the room's memory. Another layer of smoke and sound laid into the logs. Your hands shake once the danger is past, though only a little. It is the body's private revenge for being asked to behave sensibly. You pour hot water, add coffee grounds, and let the bitter steam rise into your face. The first swallow is almost painfully hot. Good. It returns you to yourself. Soon the eastern sky begins to pale in earnest. Dawn in deep winter does not leap over the horizon. It slowly reveals what the night has been keeping. First, the black of the trees softens to charcoal. Then the snow in the clearing takes on a dull blue light from within. Then details appear: the path, the chopping block, the drift against the north wall, the sag of the mule shelter roof under old snow. Each thing returns as if carefully unpacked from shadow. When there is enough light to trust your footing, you decide to go outside. Not rashly. You load the rifle, wrap your scarf high, and open the door with steady caution. The morning air cuts hard, but not with the ruthless severity of the previous freeze. A little softness has entered it, or perhaps merely less cruelty. Your boots sink into the top crust with a familiar crunch. Smoke from the chimney rises straight at first, then bends slightly east. The sky above the clearing is pale silver now, with a faint wash of pink lower down behind the timber. The tracks are plain. 2 wolves came close in the last hour. Perhaps 3. Their prints are fresh and sharp in the snow near the shelter, circling once before your noise drove them off toward the trees. One set is larger, the stride easy and assured, another is lighter, quicker. They passed within yards of the cabin wall. Near the mule shelter, the disturbed snow shows where one animal paused, turned, and sprang away at the clang of the pan. There is no blood, no broken line, no damage beyond some trampled hay and the mule's injured dignity. You crouch over the tracks a while, studying them in the cold light. The wild world has left you another message, not a threat written in grand letters. More a reminder. You're visible here. So are your animals, your food, your smoke. Life notices life. Then you go to the mule. He is unhurt, though offended enough to make that fact seem secondary. He sniffs your coat, ears turning back and then forward again. You rub his neck and speak to him in a low, steady voice until he stops tossing his head. His hide is warm beneath the blanket, his breath thick and grassy. One eye rolls toward the woods with mild suspicion. Sensible creature. You reinforce the shelter while the light grows. More cedar branches, more packed snow banked against the windward side, a better tie on the loose rope. You work briskly, and the effort warms your shoulders. The smell of cedar rises fresh where you break the boughs. Green and spicy in the cold morning air rust nearby. A small flock of snow buntings flickers suddenly from the ground to the brush, pale and quick as wind-blown scraps of paper. It feels astonishing, almost indecently cheerful, to see birds after such a night. Back at the cabin, you notice how beautiful the clearing looks in full dawn. That is the trouble with winter. It can terrify you in darkness and enchant you by breakfast. Sunlight reaches the upper snowfields beyond the trees and turns them gold at the edges. Frost on the roof sparkles sharply. The drifts around the woodpile curve in clean, bright shapes. Even the wolf tracks, unsettling as they are, lie across the yard with a kind of elegant precision. You carry water from the creek later than usual because the morning seems to ask for slower movements. The sky has cleared more fully now. Under the alders, the snow glows blue, and the creek moves dark and cold between its shelves of ice. A kingfisher rattles downstream, startling you with its sudden noise. The sound feels almost comic after so much solemn silence. You smile despite yourself. Many surviving accounts of frontier winter balance hardship with moments of piercing beauty that the writers themselves seem half embarrassed to admit. A dangerous landscape could also be a lovely one. The same snow that trapped wagons and starved livestock might throw dawnlight through the trees like cathedral glass. People endured both truths at once. Scholars sometimes note that romantic memory later polished these scenes. But the original wonder likely needed little help. Even exhausted people can recognize beauty when it stands in front of them shining. At the cabin again, you cook a better breakfast than usual. Pork, the last 2 eggs, and bread toasted crisp in the pan. The smell fills the room with a rich, almost festive warmth. You eat seated at the table instead of crouched by the hearth, and for once you take your time. The fire burns steady. Sunlight touches the sill. The walls no longer seem to lean inward with the pressure of night. They are just logs again. Good solid logs, smoke darkened and rough beneath your fingers. After the meal, you clean carefully, pan wiped, table brushed, ash drawn forward, bed straightened. Such order is not necessary in a strict sense, but it feels right today. The room deserves it. So do you. A hard night makes even simple tidiness seem like a declaration. We are still here, and the place remains ours. The day unfolds with fewer demands than the ones that came before. There is wood enough, for now, water enough, feed enough, no storm waiting in the sky. The cold remains, but in a cleaner, brighter form. You mend a harness ring, split a few rounds, and hang the blankets outside for an hour to air in the sun. Their smell changes from close woolen smoke to something lighter, colder, cleaner. When you bring them back in, they carry the whole morning with them. From time to time you glance toward the tree line. The wolves do not reappear, only their tracks persist, growing softer as the sun lifts and the crust loosens. By midday they already begin to lose their perfect edges. By afternoon they will be only marks. By tomorrow perhaps nothing at all. That passing quality strikes you. Fear can feel enormous in the dark, and by noon it is melting into common snow. Still, the event leaves something behind. Not panic, not even triumph. More a sober peace, the The cabin held, your nerve held. The mule remained safe. Dawn came when it pleased, not because you earned it, but because mornings have their own rules. Out here, that's enough to inspire gratitude. Toward late afternoon, sunlight slants low and warm across the clearing, turning the snow almost honey-coloured near the doorway. Smoke from the chimney drifts blue against the pale sky. The pines stand dark and still, keeping their long counsel. Inside. The fire crackles gently. Outside. The world looks less like a challenge and more like a patient fact. You sit in the chair by the hearth and let your body sink into its honest tiredness. The room smells of breakfast grease long faded, fresh split wood, drying wool, and cedar from the shelter repairs. Light moves slowly up the wall and then away. Nothing asks for urgency now, and so the wind down begins. The day softens around you. The cabin grows dim, not with threat, but with evening's ordinary gentleness. You bank the fire with calm hands, laying the logs so they will burn slow and kind through the first dark hours. The kettle whispers on the edge of the hearth. Your boots wait by the bed. The rifle rests within reach, though tonight it feels more like a tool than a companion. Outside, the clearing settles beneath its pale cover of snow, and the woods beyond become quiet shapes beneath a fading sky. You draw the blankets up and feel their cooled cloth warm little by little beneath your hands. The mattress gives its familiar rustle. A faint scent of clean winter air still clings to the fabric, mixed with smoke and wool and the simple smell of shelter. Somewhere beyond the wall, the mule shifts once, then grows still. No howl rises, no branch taps. Only the smallest sounds remain. The low murmur of coals, the soft settling of timber. Your own breathing, slower now, steadier, no longer listening for alarm in every pause. The room is dark amber and shadow. Safe enough, warm enough, the sort of enough that lets the mind unclench at last. Beyond the cabin, the frontier keeps its great distance, its cold beauty, its patient unknowns. But you do not need to answer all of that tonight. You only need this bed, this fire, this roof, this small circle of human order held against the winter dark. So your thoughts loosen. The day slips gently from your shoulders. The clearing fades. The trees fade. Even the memory of bright eyes in snow thins into something far away and quiet. What remains is the hush of the cabin, the warmth near the hearth, and the slow comfort of rest arriving without hurry. And in that softening stillness, with the fire breathing low and the night resting lightly on the roof, you let yourself drift at last into sleep.